Salutations, ghouls and freaks. Welcome to this podcast, The Storm, where insane slashers, undead blood drinkers, and all around crooked beans convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the Mage of Madness, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Good evening, and you almost got through it without any hiccups.
Right.
And then next week is the last week to do it, and then you have to switch back over again.
Right. And I am your host / Scarecrow impersonator, bringing some more pop culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Other than the fact that I seem to be in the minority opinion on the new Dune movie. Both Thursday night on Comics Division's channel and recently on Extreme Movie Show. Do go and subscribe if you haven't already. I had to be kind of the dissenting opinion who thought that Denis Villeneuve sucks and he needs to find other things to do than ruining blockbusters.
I haven't seen it, nor really intended to.
It's apparently every other motherfucker on the planet likes it, but I found it to be soulless and pretentious like any other discount Christopher Nolan movie.
Right.
But it seems like I'm going to get a double dose of that when Eternals shows up, because that seems to be the route they're going to. So the next couple of weeks are not going to be fun for me, folks.
Right. Yeah, pretty much Dalton sent me everything. So, yeah. Well, actually, before we move on to the first article, next week we're going to be doing our podcast on Saturday instead of Sunday, simply because I'm going to be scaring trick-or-treaters all night on Halloween.
And I, by rights, should find something mystical to do on Halloween, although I haven't figured out one yet. This year, I don't know what it is, but my Halloween mojo has been stymied at every turn here. So I don't know what's wrong with this year, but I will find something mystical to do on Halloween. God damn it, come hell or high water.
Uh-huh.
Or should I say, come trooping fae or tricksy goblin creature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is from National Geographic, I believe .com or .org.
I think it's .org, but I could be wrong.
It's from nationalgeographic.org. Witch hunt tourism is lucrative. It also obscures a tragic history.
If this is going to become yet another let's virtue signal for the women and hang the very concept of witchcraft thing, I'm going to be annoyed. Also, as a modern day practicing occultist, You leave our places alone, thank you very much. I find it not only enjoyable, but honestly kind of vindicating that so many places so tied in with the concept of witchcraft have become basically witch meccas, because it would have made the Puritans who, once engaged in the burning times, um, turn in their graves. And to that, my response is basically, well, how do you like it? Like, I don't want to say Agatha from Paranorman did nothing wrong, but I'm not going to say that I wouldn't be doing the exact same shit if I were in her shoes. Anyway, moving on.
Right. Okay. All right. Salem, Massachusetts. Balances profit and tribute. How can other popular witch history sites do the same? It's by Karen Gardner, published October 31st, 2020.
So it's actually last year. Okay.
I was surprised we didn't cover it then.
I'm surprised I didn't find it then. I'm always on the lookout for stuff like this, especially in October. But oh well.
Centuries after a witch panic swept through Europe and parts of America, witches still cast a mighty spell. They are ascribed astonishing powers, romanticized, and reincarnated as Halloween decorations. They star in film, on stage, and on TV, often depicted as wicked, but sometimes as good, uh, in air quotes, and even lovable. In reality, witches and those accused of using magic are real people. Their stories, appropriated and not always accurately told, being revenue to places associated with the occult, places such as Salem, Massachusetts, and Zagu, Zar, Zaguarmurdi, the Salem of Spain.
Okay, but okay, here's gonna be my fundamental issue with this. Where does that revenue go, National Geographic? I'll tell you where it usually goes. It ends up going to modern day practitioners of these arts. And therein lies the issue with you whining and bitching and complaining about this. Because here's the thing about Salem, and I can't speak for the Spanish one because I don't know as much about the Spanish one. But the thing about Salem is that by becoming the mecca for all things occult that it became in the 70s and 80s, it basically took the power back away from the traumatic history that it had. Because now, rather than being a place of persecution, punishment, and provocation, it's a place where honest to goodness practitioners of all stripes, even the stripes that I don't particularly like or respect, like, your New Agey type stuff or your Wiccan type stuff, um, even those can basically take one of the most puritanical foobar fucking travesties in history and turn it into a means of power. It's literally, um in many activist circles in this day and age, there's this concept of reclaiming, which in my opinion is better served by just kind of leaving things alone. But this this is organically one of the most clear examples of genuine reclaiming I've ever seen. Because instead of allowing the puritanical New England bullshit that was the history of Salem, Massachusetts, defined Salem, Massachusetts, now what defines it is the witchcraft, because it's basically witch mecca. That's the way it should be. That's the most effective way by far of sticking it to those puritanical douchebags from several millennia or 100 years ago. And by whining about it, all you're doing is saying those people shouldn't be allowed to make money about this. Okay, so you're saying that no Jews should ever profit from the history of the Holocaust, and no black people should ever profit from the history of the civil rights movement. Okay, That's because that's effectively what you're doing. You're saying a people that were intended to be persecuted by a thing shouldn't be allowed to make profit from that thing. Nor should the people who are descended from the persecutors be allowed to apologize by encouraging the very thing that they once were condemned for persecuting. That seems like a very bass-backwards opinion to me, but never the fuck mind. Moving on.
Right. But with increasing awareness of present-day persecution of people, mostly women, for witchcraft around the world, there is a growing unease about how we remember the men, women, and children lost to witch hunts in tourist towns. Question is, how do we balance commemoration with commodification? The answer
Okay,
is easy.
okay. Two things. Number one, stop with this especially women bullshit, because even though a disproportionate number of people of the female gender were persecuted for witchcraft, we have to once again look at the actual stated reasons as to why, and more importantly, what happened to the people under these circumstances. And once again, this leads me to the the history of the witch trials that nobody but me ever seems to want to talk about, which is the medieval conception of witchcraft was a practitioner who was on the left-hand path, making a bargain, usually with a demon, although sometimes, as per the trials of the Queen of Elfame, it was other beings, using sex magic to work their works. That was the medieval definition of witchcraft. And we know this because in the go-to witchcraft fighting manual of the time, the Malleus Maleficarum, the main cut and thrust of witchcraft was, according to Jacob Springer and Heinrich Kramer, and I quote, all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is in women insatiable, unquote, which was in a context of the puritanical understanding of sexuality was that sex was only ever supposed to be used for the generative instinct, quote unquote. And so any use of sexuality that wasn't for the sake of generating children was considered a corruption or a misuse of that energy. And the reason why women were considered more vulnerable to the devil in the Puritan mind was because their sex drive was considered more powerful because they were the ones that actually bore children. And power, A, should be used responsibly, and B, because women were considered more pure on average, they were considered more innocent and therefore more liable to be tricked by the devil into doing his bidding without even realizing it. Which is why most of the female witch trials included the proposal that they needed to persecute the witch in order to save her soul for the afterlife. In the case of male practitioners, who were often referred to as warlocks, which comes from an Anglo-Saxon word which means traitor, there was no such conception of trying to save their soul. Because in the Puritan mind, the incredibly traditionalist Puritan mind, when a woman accidentally signed her soul over to the devil, quote unquote, she was thought to have been tricked and therefore needing to be saved by her from her own choices. When a man did the same thing, he was thought to be actively betraying his oath to God and doing so on purpose and in full volition. So, in other words, when women were alleged to have signed their souls over to the devil, it wasn't their fault. They were tricked into it, so let's save them. But when men were thought to have signed their souls over to the devil, they did it in full cognition of what they did. They were not tricked, and therefore we can blame them. So you can take this people were victims of witch trials, but especially women bullshit, and shove it directly up your ass. It was because women were thought to be more powerful, women were thought to be more pure, and women were thought to be unable to control their own actions and therefore needing to be saved. When men did the same thing, they were not given any such leeway or benefit of the doubt. They were immediately straight up condemned. So you can miss me with all that shit. Moving on.
Right. Okay. So, witch kitsch. Every Halloween, images of the hook-nosed woman wearing a pointy hat crop up everywhere, and in the United States, perhaps nowhere more so than in Salem.
Brainstorm.
Hello?
Did you stop for some reason?
I thought you had something to say there.
Oh, well, I guess I can go into the sort of.
I can read another. I can read like another paragraph. Like, I can.
Okay.
I, I thought I was stopping because I thought you might have something to say. So,
Well, the long and the short of it is the modern day conception of the witch, the old crone with the pointed hat thing, actually comes from the images of medieval alewives, because basically when you had a job in medieval society, there was a specific like outfit or uniform that went along with it, and women who were the wives of brewers or who were brewers in their own right would often wear a pointed conical hat to signify that they were alewives, and the how and why as to how that became synonymous with witchcraft was essentially there was a analogy made to the ability to brew things like beer, um, would be like a transferable skill if you wanted to switch to um, brewing potions, which sort of made sense in the sense that most women who engaged in that kind of cottage industry were also like the village healers who would often make like herbal remedies and such um, for their neighbors, and would be basically the resident folk apothecary. And the logic was if you knew how to brew beer and you knew how to brew medicines, then you could also use your knowledge of herbs and nature and stuff to harm people as easily. And that therefore the imagery of the alewife or the breweress became synonymous with the image of the Halloween witch. That's the long and the short of that
all right.
particular thing.
In pre-pandemic years, nearly a million tourists generate nearly 110 million pounds in the city, now synonymous with the witch trials of 1692, in which 19 people were executed for witchcraft. The month-long Halloween celebration is the biggest draw, accounting for more than 30% of the city's annual visitors, who arrive in costume and snap photos of police wearing pointy hatted patches and shop for witch-adorned shot glasses. Wait, there's a month-long. Huh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they basically turned all of October into let's celebrate the witch trials, yay. Although to be fair, they do it pretty much all year round. It just gets really, really like Halloween is their busy season and their epic season, which makes total sense because Halloween is the supernatural weirdness holiday. So of course a um place with such heavy ties to historical supernatural weirdness would become popular around that time, especially when you consider that, like I said, um, Salem, Massachusetts, in my opinion, for the better, has become witch central because basically the the legacy of Salem has become so synonymous with witchcraft that all the witches around basically went, I got to get me a piece of that for the sake of, kind of tying into the old energy, and so they did. And for the record, for all of this, oh, you're commercializing it and that makes it bad shit. Um, there are also museums, like three or four of them in Salem, and one of them doesn't even have anything to do with like uh the witch trial stuff explicitly. There's also a very heavy history in Salem of piracy. because people like Blackbeard often use port towns like Salem as trading posts. So I don't see you saying that like acknowledging Salem's history of piracy is like encouraging um modern day snipers on like the Cuban coast or something. So again, I must ask, are you mad that anyone is making any money about this, or are you mad because you don't think it's genuine enough, or are you mad because the people that are making money are being genuine? Anyway, moving forward.
Similar scene uh, occur year round in. Uh, Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze there. Okay, so a similar scene occurs year round in Zugarramurdi in northern Spain, where 7,000 people were accused of witchcraft during the Basque witch trials in the early 1600s. Uh, Visitors tour a nearby cave where conjurers were said to cavort with the devil, disguised as a goat. Visit a museum devoted to the history and shop for witch-themed uh, shop schools?
Tchotchkes.
Tchotchkes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I think it's worth noting here that this whoever wrote this article for National Geographic is complaining that it's over commercialized, but are are you against museums now, or are you just against museums having gift shops? And if you are, then you're really, really, really dumb. And also, I would imagine that much like in Salem, this Spanish town that neither of us can pronounce, even though one of us happens to be Hispanic, but never mind. Um, but yeah, this Spanish town that nobody can pronounce, I would imagine, has a similar ratio of people who are genuine practitioners, be they, your garden variety New Agers and Wiccans and tarot readers and such, or whether they be the occasional like old school like in Spain it wouldn't be um conjure doctors and hoodoo people like it is in Salem. It would probably be along the lines of um the Italian Strigoi, but I'm splitting hairs there. But my point is in the mix there you have people who are genuine practitioners of this stuff. So what's wrong with them making money about something that does actually impact their history? Because I wouldn't find anything wrong with that necessarily. If people were making money making fun of those people, then you might conceivably have a point. But most of the money being made in places like Salem, and I would assume in the Spanish place as well, are made on the behalf of the town because they've actually embraced their witchy heritage and on the behalf of actual practitioners of this stuff who never shunned it and who actually came to this place, I would imagine, and I'm again extrapolating from what I know of Salem, but a lot of people come to Salem specifically because of its legacy so that they can kind of tap into the legacy there. And I don't see anything wrong with that. And again, are we really going to split hairs about museums having gift shops? Because that's really stupid. Moving on.
Hmm. Okay. But while witch tourism may be fun, some scholars worry that these stereotypes do more harm than good. The selling of dolls in gift shops like those in Spain perpetuates uh, perpetuates the idea that the so-called witches were not victims of a terrible persecution, but fictional figures. Now, that's for people at large who are kind of don't normies.
Yeah. hmm
Normies.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, number one, those people that are so stupid that they can't tell the difference between those two things are probably unreachable in general. But if there's anything that's going to convince them that there's more to this than just fiction, it's probably going to be a town full of people who are actual practitioners of it, selling things related to the actual craft and relating it to the history that already exists there. So while I can see where you're coming from with the idea of, there's some people that do this just out of opportunism and don't really care one way or the other about the history or the practice. Those people are well and truly outweighed by the people who are either actual historians and lovers of the history or actual practitioners of some description or other. And yes, and again, I'm including all varieties of practitioner there, not just the ones that I consider to be more quote unquote legitimate than others. But again, what would you have them do? Would you have them shun their history entirely? Would you have them make it into victimology 101, just like every other subcategory of history? Or would you rather them reclaim what reclaim their history and their art, which is what they are doing? And what's hilarious to me about this Salem thing and about this idea of reclaiming that a lot of modern activists seem to love so much is Salem is one of the places on Earth, and I would imagine this Spanish town is very much the same, um, where nobody needed to bring up the concept of reclaiming to them. People just sort of automatically did it to and for themselves. It's it's they're doing what activists usually advise people to do, and they're doing it pro bono without any instruction whatsoever. And the activists and the academics are still bitching and complaining somehow. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. Says Sylvia Fridici, author of Caliban and the Witch. I do not think the tourists who buy these dolls realize that these were women who were charged with fictional crimes and then horribly tortured and most often burned alive. Okay, Spain. I believe did actually do witch burnings.
They did. Salem was an English colony at the time, and therefore witchcraft was persecuted as a civil offense, not a religious one, and therefore they were hung and not burned. Um,
Huh.
except for Giles Corey, who was crushed to death because he just wouldn't play the game. They demanded he confess, and he basically said, "Well, if you think I'm so guilty, why don't you press me for an answer?" So they did, and the only thing he kept saying when they pressed him for an answer was more weight. Be like Charles, be like Giles Corey, ladies and gentlemen. Giles Corey is the Chad of colonial history. Never give an inch to other people's bullshit, folks. Always bait them for more where possible. But anyway, again, I find it a little bit odd that you would say such a thing because I don't know about this Spanish place, but the very first thing anyone learns about the Salem witch trials, even if they never go there, even if they never actively look into the history themselves, it's stuff we're taught in grade school. The first thing we're taught is that these people were being accused of crimes they didn't commit, and that people were being moralistic and hysterical. Like every child who's ever been shown the Crucible in school can tell you that.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, which is to say nothing of every other adaptation of the Salem witch story over the years, up to and including the rather excellent sort of premium cable show from a couple of years ago called Salem, which yes does twist the history a little bit, but it also pays a lot of deference to what people thought witchcraft was like in like the medieval and Renaissance conception of it, in both the like medieval and modern contexts. So yeah, I really like it, but that's neither here nor there. Everyone who knows anything about the Salem witch trials knows the basic gist of these people were persecuted for crimes they didn't commit, and their neighbors were being hysterical moralists. That's basically Salem 101. It actually requires more depth of learning to learn that they weren't just being completely crazy. There actually was an existing mindset that they were acting under to do this. And I personally think that side of the story is the one that gets untold most of the time and that deserves to be told more. Like the thing I just said about the hows and whys of why women were disproportionately accused versus when men were accused. Because usually, especially now, people stop it as the women's were mostly the victims, and therefore it makes it even more egregious rather than actually looking at the accounts of the trials themselves and the reasons given by the people who were doing the accusing as to why that was. And pro tip to all the feminist scholars out there, it had nothing to do with misogyny. It had to do with women were considered more pure and better, and therefore more in need of and justified in protecting. But that part of the story for some reason never gets told. And that part of the story I wouldn't mind getting told more often, but I'm fairly certain that me just even insinuating that made a bunch of feminist heads explode. So it's never going to get taught in public. It's going to get more and more female focused as time goes on, I have a feeling. And it's going to be a horrible miscarriage of justice that it does. But in any case, the best way of making amends for this history is for these arts and these spiritual paths to be encouraged rather than discouraged, and for the people who are modern day practitioners of this thing to be rewarded for their knowledge and their connection of this history, which is what they are doing, which is why I'm a bit confused about why the academic set and the activist set are getting so verklempt over this, because what could be better to stick it to, the traditionalists of yesteryear than to have everything they fear be not just encouraged in the place they persecuted it in, but also to be the thing that defines the history of their town. Because I can guarantee you, almost everyone who finds their way into and out of Salem is on the side of the accused, not the side of the accuser by the end of it. Most of us all know that that Cotton Mather or Reverend Hale or the Board of Selectmen of Salem were all completely stupid and idiotic and backward. And most of us side eventually with people like Tituba or Bridget Bishop or Rebecca Nurse, and so on and so forth. So you essentially already have everything you could conceivably want, activists and academics, and you're still finding reasons to bitch. And that's what annoys me. As a practitioner, if nothing else, it annoys me that you're taking something that is ours, that is, effectively mine, and you're demanding that it be taken away from me because it's not teaching your conception of history enough. Well, pardon me, sirs and madams, but hyper-focusing on victimhood, not really constructive, especially when you consider that we already sort of do. You don't need to encourage things that already automatically happen. You need to encourage things that don't happen unless they are encouraged. Like, for example, acknowledging that the witch trials were not born out of misogyny, but out of a worshipful, almost divine respect for women that ended up getting turned on its head because of the moralistic woo of the period rather than any sort of hatred. And also, while we're on this topic, most of the accusers in Salem were teenage girls who were so starved for power that once they realized they could get attention by feigning witchcraft possession symptoms, they could basically accuse and get rid of anyone they wanted. So when are we going to talk about that little canard that it was mostly women accusing other women? and using men as a means to carry it out. But, oh my, I must have committed heresy just now. I guess it's time for me to hang. Ithy. Moving on.
Yeah. All right. History repeating. From the late 16th to mid 17th centuries, fear of witchcraft spread across early modern era Europe. At the time, land disputes, unexplained illnesses, and suspicion of transgressive or powerful women were among the sources of accusations of witchcraft. In the process, tens of thousands of innocent people were killed in witchcraft trials. Witchcraft is difficult to describe. Britannica categorizes it as a religious belief and defines it as the exercise or invocation of alleged supernatural powers to control people or events. Practices typically involve sorcery or magic. But witchcraft encompasses a wide range of cultural and regional beliefs, from shamanism to metaphysical ideas to pre Christian folklore traditions that historically have been viewed negatively.
Okay, I'm gonna help you out because this is really, really dumb. But okay. Witchcraft generally refers to what we in the industry refer to as low or natural magic, i.e., folk magic, folk shamanism, and so on. It's generally speaking the use of herbs and like natural household implements, which is contrasted to the more scholarly and more sort of upper crust at the time ritual magic, which was the kind of thing that you saw people like priests and monks do a lot, even though a lot of them would prefer that they didn't get caught doing such. For example, you can compare um, things like the Book of Secrets of Albertus Magnus, which was mostly a treatise on folk magic, or, for example, the Petit Albert, which was again mostly just a hodgepodge of random folk magic. Compare that to something like the Munich Necromancer's Manual or the um, the recent publication of excerpts from Necromancy in the Medici Library. That's what you're generally referring to when you're referring to witchcraft in general. What the medieval conception of witchcraft was a person using, again, usually homespun, low or folk magic in a what we would now refer to as left-hand path sense in order to compact with a demon or other spirit to do their work. And usually, and again, the main cut and thrust of why everyone was paranoid about it, at least in the religious mind, was witches of the Middle Ages were thought to mostly use sex magic. Again, to quote the Malleus Maleficarum, all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, unquote. So yes, while the term witchcraft generally refers to homespun or low magic, or natural magic or folk magic. What you specifically are referring to when you refer to the medieval conception is a bit more specific. A left-hand path practitioner engaging in a pact with a spirit and uses their magic usually through some mechanism or other of what Aleister Crowley would refer to as sex magic. That's what you generally mean. What, as most specific as I can get, what you generally mean when you say the medieval conception of witchcraft. Someone who works through a pact, works on the left-hand path, and works through the medium of sex magic mostly. But that would require. But the definition I just gave, loves, would require you to actually know enough about this practice to actually know the specifics of it. And by skirting the issue entirely by giving the broadest possible definition, you've demonstrated that while you might be virtue signaling on the behalf of the notion of witchcraft, you don't know the first thing about it. Which, again, bothers me more than the fact that you are bringing it up. Because if you're going to speak with authority on something, it's kind of crucial that you sort of, oh, I don't know things about it. Just saying. Moving on.
Right. Okay. 100 years later, misperception around witchcraft still circulates. As a result, witch hunts are very much a 21st century practice in many parts of the world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, India, and Papua New Guinea.
You really don't want to get into the specifics as to why that is, my darling, because you might end up having to blame quite a lot of extremist Muslim groups if you did that, because that the majority of people that still engage in things like beheading for sorcery are Muslim, um, which is extra funny when you consider that Islam has its own mystical tradition. Specifically, I believe it's Sufism that is the mystical one, the like mystical mainstream branch of Islam. And then, of course, you have the practice of what's called sihir, which is literally the Islamic word for sorcery, most of which involves working with jinn, in particular your own personal Quran, which is the um, which is the Islamic sort of variant of the Greek conception of the personal daimon, or the Jewish conception of the holy guardian angel as outlined in the Aber text. And again, this is stuff you would know if you bothered to do 5 seconds of research and actually cared about this practice. But again, I doubt that you're actually going to point out that the majority of modern day witch trials are done by extremist Muslims, because that would require blaming Islam or Muslims for something, and the modern day academic zeitgeist is absolutely forbidden from doing that. And to a certain extent, I can understand why some of that might be justified, but again, if you're not going to actually address the problem, then you have no hope of fixing it. All you can do is virtue signal. If you're going to talk about a problem, you might want to actually understand that problem well enough to propose reasonable solutions to it. My solution to that would be encouraging people like Imam Tawhidi and Majid Nawaz, who are trying desperately to basically reform fundamentalist Islam in much the same way that Martin Luther and Calvin reformed Catholicism into the Protestant Reformation about 500 years ago. That would be my proposed solution. Not pretending the sorcery isn't there, not killing all these extremists, but simply encouraging and proposing less extreme versions of this practice that actually allow for and actually to some degree encourage the mystical aspect of their religion. Because this is the other thing. Every religion, or as good as all of them, have some version or other of a magical system. The Jews have Kabbalah, the Christians have theurgy, the you know majority of modern day reconstructions of paganism are absolutely lousy with a mixture of the actual religion and the magic associated with it, and on and on and on we can go. I mean, there's even the quote unquote traditionalist Martinist order that basically blends um, Judaism, Judaism's Kabbalah and mystical practices with Christianity's theurgy and mystical practices. So, yeah, every religion under the sun has a mystical sort of subcategory to it. My move would be to encourage people to explore those more than they explore the moralistic or narrativistic parts of their religion, because that would be focusing on the parts of their religion that actually, are function and logic oriented rather than narrative and morality oriented. But oh well. Moving on.
Okay. Well, authorities in most countries simply turn a blind eye. Some legal systems sanction the persecution. In addition to having laws against sorcery, a crime that carries a death sentence, Saudi Arabia established an anti-witchcraft unit in 2000, 2009 within the country's religious police department.
Again,
There was a
you're
lot
talking
wrong with that sentence.
you're talking about Sharia. Name the problem directly if you're going to talk about it at all. What you are talking about is largely a problem with modern day extremist Muslims, and in particular with Sharia law. But it has almost next to nothing to do with the medieval conception of witchcraft that you're currently virtue signaling about. So I don't know why you brought it up, but if you're going to bring it up, actually have something substantive to say on the matter, please. Moving on.
Witch hunts have escalated in some parts of the world is a difficult question. Why witch hunts have escalated in some parts of the world is a difficult question to answer. Besides the same conflicts prevalent in early modern Europe, witchcraft can be a convenient cloak for the increasing problem of gender-based violence. Let me before you do, don't I need to finish
I
it?
know. Go and finish, and then I will beat this dead horse yet again because it will not fucking die.
Violence against women has greatly intensified in recent years, said Federici, for reasons, I believe, that have some relation to the violence inflicted on women through the witch hunts of the past. Weren't there a lot of men and women? Like, it was kind of equal.
Yeah, it was about a 60-40 split in most places, and it only ever got down to about a 70-30 split, even at its worst. But again, the issue I'm going to take with this is, once again, the logic presented when these trials were actually happening. Like, in the minds of the people being accused and in the minds of the people doing the accusing, the reasoning given had nothing to do with misogyny. It had to do with the fact that, again, in the medieval mind, their notion of what witchcraft was had to do with what we would now today refer to as sex magic, and the church was paranoid in general about anyone using sexuality for anything other than procreation and the generative instinct, quote unquote. And because women's generative instinct was considered to be stronger because they were the ones that actually bore the children, and also more pure because women were in general considered more pure. What the hell? What happened? Okay, I'm assuming somebody tried to call you.
Oh, sorry. No, yeah, that's my
Yeah.
bad.
Okay, well, back to what I was saying. The reason why more women were generally speaking accused of witchcraft was because they were the ones who were considered to be pure enough, to be innocent enough to be tricked into signing their souls away, and their generative instinct was considered to be stronger, therefore their magic was more dangerous in theory. And once again, in general, when women are accused of witchcraft, there is the floating asterisk in the background of, we're doing this for your own good to save your soul. When men are accused of the exact same shit, they are considered to be entirely possessed of their own free will and therefore are traitors, which is where the word warlock comes from, to God. And I'm betting that it's very much the same in Islam, especially because Islam takes the purity of women so seriously that they force women to cover their bodies, not to oppress the women, but to prevent the men from looking at them. That's the other elephant in the room that nobody likes to talk about in these situations. Most people, when they see the burqa, they automatically assume that must be misogynistic because it prevents the woman from showing herself to the world. But if you actually look at the Quran, the justification given for the burqa is men are animals and cannot control themselves around the sight of women, and therefore dress modestly women so that no man is forced to behave like an animal around you. Which to me, that strikes that strikes a more misinterest chord than anything, because it assumes that men are bestial, and their very gaze can be enough to harm women. It's essentially, ironically, the exact same rationale as the feminist notion of the male gaze. The only difference is who is to blame and who has to act under these situations. In the feminist conception of the male gaze is considered a bad thing, and therefore men should do the decent thing by just not looking at them. But in the Islamic conception of the male gaze is still a problem. The solution is just different, because the solution is, if men's gaze upon women's flesh is a problem, then we should put something in between the woman's body and the men's gaze so that men cannot look. In one case, the men are just morally supposed not to look for their own good, and in the other case, the woman at least takes the initiative to put something in between her body and the man so that he can't look. And in either case, the justification is basically, men are bad and women are fragile, therefore let's protect the fragile women from the terrible man. It's not misogyny, it's a bastardization of the desire to protect and purify women. If anything, it's I love you so much I can't allow you to be free. It's love gone wrong, not hate gone direct. Moving on.
The failure to recognize the history of witch hunts may be a factor too. No day of memory has been introduced in any European calendar, writes Federici in the introduction to her 2018 collection of essays, Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women. The victim's history can't be buried in silence unless we want their destiny to be repeated, as is already happening in many parts of the world.
And yet you wrote an essay called Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women, completely all but erasing, at least in the title, that at least 30 to 40% of all witch trials were men. And in a lot of cases, and here's the other thing, in a lot of cases when men were accused, they were thought to be the ringleaders or the coven masters of their particular hive of witches. In other words, more women might have been accused, but when men were accused, it was more severe, and it was thought that in a lot of cases, the male sorcerer had tricked the female witches into following him. But we're never going to address this little canard now, are we? Because that might imply that women weren't the absolute victims of everything under the sun, and several things that aren't. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a more fitting commemoration. Around the world, there are efforts to go beyond the broomstick riding cliche and realistically recognize this dark history. Okay, so I do have something to add. This is sort of completely unrelated to this. It's more just a thing that has always bugged me with witches, specifically like pop culture thing.
Mm-hmm.
And feel free to give me any type of like historical accuracy to this to explain it, but I've never gotten the whole broom riding thing, mainly for practical reasons. Like it just seems so. It's like sitting on a bike stool. You know the seat of a bike for too
Yeah.
long. It just seems like it honestly hurt a lot to sit on broom to ride.
Yeah. The image of the broomstick riding witch comes again from the fact that most witches were considered to be again low or natural magic or folk magic, i.e. The sorts of tools that you see more ritualistic magics employing in like theurgy and necromancy, and the more like scholastic and theurgical varieties were expensive and costly, and they were considered a sign of luxury, whereas witches and cunning folk, which were sort of the peasant magic users, were thought to use everyday objects for mystical purposes. So where a wizard would have a wizard or a necromancer might have a wand or a staff that he made specifically for the purpose. A witch was thought to just use the broom that she was already using to sweep things with. As for the flying, that has to do with the fact that many alleged witches used what are called flying ointment, which were basically astral projection aids that often included toxic chemicals they didn't know or toxic herbs that they didn't know were toxic at the time, like nightshade or hemlock or belladonna, and it gave the person the sensation and often the hallucination that they were flying. In fact, that was one of the first things that led people to the conclusion, well, it all must be bullshit because this one aspect might be tainted by the fact that people's minds were being distorted at the time. Which, is a hell of a generalization, if anything, but never mind. But yeah, that's where the broomstick and the flying come from, is the medieval conception of it again. Moving forward.
Okay. Salem, Massachusetts. Proctor's Ledge is an understated landscape area where the accused were hung in 1692. In Essex, England, a small plaque lists the names of the 33 victims held at Castle Park.
Yeah, okay. And what would you rather have happen? Because, like I said, the way that the community, quote unquote, has chosen to take back the power, quote unquote, is by making the witch the witchcraft connections a badge of pride rather than a badge of shame, and by allowing actual practitioners to make as much money as they like at it. Which to me seems like a much more constructive way of dealing with this than wallowing in victimhood, and especially the women are always the victims mentality that seems to appropriate every aspect of history in this day and age. Because as bad as hanging is, for my money, the worst death that occurred as a result of the Salem witch trials was Giles Corey. He was literally crushed to death by heavy boulders because he wouldn't give a confession, just wouldn't play the game entirely. But we can't ever talk about that because that might make someone other than women seem like the primary victims of this historical travesty. And we just can't have that, because why? I don't know, but yeah. Moving on.
In Scotland, a stone plaque in Orkney Islands remembers the 80 people killed at Gallow Hall, along the Fife coastal path. 3 plaques note that 380 people accused of witchcraft. Also in Fife, government officials in 2019 proposed a 200-year-old lighthouse dedicated to the country's most famous victim, Lilias Addy, who died in prison in 1704 while awaiting trial, and all victims of the country's witch panic. Ultimately, however, the campaign was defeated.
Okay, but the plaques and everything are still there. So again, it seems like you already have everything you could conceivably want, and you're still bitching. Because it doesn't wallow in victimhood, and it in fact wallows instead in power, which is more constructive. Rather than wallow in, we used to be so persecuted, we've gotten to a point now where it's, we used to be persecuted, but now we have all the power we need, and so let's make a buck off it, while still commemorating the history involved. That's a much more constructive way of handling this shit than otherwise.
But on massive scale and impact of Norway's still Styleneset Memorial. Erected in 2011, this structure describes the lives of 77 women and 14 men executed in the 17th century Finnmark witch trials. Visitors come upon it at the end of the Norwegian Scenic Route Ranger, uh, at the end of the Barents Sea, into which accused witches were thrown. If they floated, they were guilty.
Yeah, the the hypocrisy of quote unquote swimming the witch. Yeah, that's the idea was water is inherently a pure thing. Therefore, if a witch was guilty, it would reject her, and or she would use magic to make sure she could swim. But if she drowned, then that was the water accepting her, meaning that her body was pure and therefore wasn't defiled by the devil. So it was the
Fucker dies.
yeah, it was the very definition of a no-win scenario. Because if you somehow managed to float, then you did the bad thing and therefore we'll take you off and burn you. And if you didn't float, then well, you were innocent. Sorry, we accidentally accused you, but oh, you're dead now, never mind.
Dumbasses.
The history of human stupidity is long.
Yep. Okay. Architect Peter Sumter designed a long pavilion leading to a steel and smoked glass box. Inside the box, artist Louis Bourgeois' sculpture "The Damned, the Possessed, and the Beloved" 2007 and 2010 highlights a burning steel chair encircled by mirrors. I won't lie, that just sounds really cool to look at.
It does sound interesting, although I don't like the again, my issue is I much prefer the let's move past this and gain power from it method to the let's wallow forever in our perpetual victimhood. Oh, we will never be clean. Oh, we will never be clean. I'm sorry we did this whip self approach.
Right. Next to each of the pavilions, 91 frame steel windows, one for each victim. Text printed on silk, written by historian Olive Helen Williamson, and based on court records, name the victims, the charges against them, and their sentence. Among them remembered the Samai woman, Karen Edisdatter, who was the first of 13 women blamed for a shipwreck in 1617, and Maret, known only as Torsten's wife, who was burned at the stake in 1645 and left only a pair of blue pants and an old sweater.
Ouch. Moving forward, I guess. I really
Yeah,
don't have anything to say about that. Other than again, I would rather focus on let's make the world of today better than dwell on how the past was fucked, please. Because if we're seriously going to sit here and wallow until we've itemized every single way that the past was fucked, we will be here until the end of time. Or at least the end of the earth.
right. I was very much aware of the danger of romanticizing the witch trials, says Williamson. I tried to treat the historical material in a respectful way, not to dramatize. I want to give the victims their dignity back, a dignity they never got in their own lives. I want to show they were human beings, each with a name and a voice, that they had lives in the Finnmark villages.
Okay, but again, you can do that without fetishizing the victimhood and over dramatic. Because this is the problem. You may say you don't want to over dramatize things, but um, by wallowing in victimhood, all you're doing is turning this from something that otherwise would be a historical um crime thriller effectively to a, let's all bawl our eyes out tragedy. And whether it's historical reverence or whether it's um fetishizing over dramatic victimhood, you're still over dramatizing it. You're just putting the impetus in a different place. And my solution would be, if you want to truly honor these people's memories, let's show the world that we don't have a problem with this anymore by allowing people to come in and enjoy themselves within the context of this area. And also, why not bring in a few practitioners to actively, sell their wares? If we really want to stick it to a bunch of dead white men, which I'm saying for the sake of putting it in terms that the person who wrote this will probably understand, if we really want to stick it to all those evil, bad, tradcon, traditionalist white men of yesteryear, then go essentially the Paranorman route of, instead of constantly fetishizing what they did wrong, fetishize the fact that your old backwards ways have no more power here, and the thing you feared so much is now the thing that people come to this town for. Seems like a more substantive fuck you to them, to me, frankly. Moving on.
Mhm. An uneasy balance. Dionyset has become a model for activists in Scotland, where the history of witch persecution is particularly grim. Locals are pushing for wider recognition of the atrocities committed in the country at a time when protests over monuments that inaccurately reflect history are roiling America and Europe. I mean, okay, so I could kind of understand that. I can kind of get that. You know,
Yeah, if it's not being acknowledged, then by all means acknowledge it, but don't. You know, there's a fine line between acknowledging that it happened, like we did with the Salem witch trials, and like we did in places like Würzburg, Germany, or that Spanish town that, again, I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce. Um, Acknowledge it and then let people move on and find their own way to make peace with it by shunning the traditionalism of yesteryear and embracing, ironically, the witchcraft. Um, that's the best solution that's going to make as many people as possible happy, and it's probably going to make people more accepting, all things considered, because you know you can say a lot of bad things about people you've never met, if you've never met them. If you've never had any exposure to a black person in your life, then they're only ever going to be the N-word to you. If you've never seen a gay person, then they're all that F word that not even I, who is one, can get away with saying. Um, but once your neighbor is gay, or your neighbor is black or whatever, then you stop associating it with, oh, they're the N word, or oh, they're the F word, and move on to, hey, it's that guy like my neighbor, or that guy like that other guy like my neighbor, or so on. So if you want to stop people from fearing witchcraft, why not introduce them to some witches? That that seems like a perfect solution to me.
hello, good sir. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Brainstormer is 1,000 miles ahead of everybody on this because, yeah, as his best friend for going on like 3 years now, he's never had a problem with me for this, and in fact, if anything, he has made use of my particular specialization in various stories and things. So,
I mean, my only issue with you is you're kind of a racist bastard.
uh,
That is a joke, people. Okay, like for anyone who's like first time watching this, total joke
yeah,
there.
we mock each other's minority statuses to show just how unimportant they fundamentally are to us. Um,
Also, your puns. Like I legitimately cannot stand your
well,
puns.
nobody can actually stand puns, dude. puns don't aim for laughter. They aim for groans. If you're not groaning, then the person has punned correctly. I'm surprised you didn't bring up the. I'm surprised you didn't bring up my food preferences again for the 500th time.
Now that's what I find weird about you. It's not one of the things I get very annoyed about.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, moving forward.
People care about recording history correctly. Yeah, again, I'm not. I got no problem.
Yeah, by all means, accuracy for the win. But here's the other fundamental thing: wallowing in victimhood is not accurate historical storytelling. Because here's the thing.
It's funny you say that.
Oh god.
Yeah, let me read. I'm sorry. I stopped there, but it goes on, so I should probably finish the whole
Okay,
thing.
finish it, and then I'll say my thing.
People care about recording history correctly, especially women who are still not equal in society, says Claire Mitchell, an Edinburgh based criminal defense lawyer who has started a campaign for a parliament backed legal pardon, apology, and monument.
Okay, well, I'm not even going to address the but women aren't even equal in today's world because that will spin us right into a long list of the many ways that men are currently being screwed over in civilization at the because we constantly fetishize the victimhood of women. But the other half of that leads me back to my point. Here's the thing. We like to believe, because we're kind of still dumb as a species, that our generation is the first generation that ever figured out how to be human correctly, and ever figured out how to treat women well, and ever figured out how to treat minorities well, and ever, da 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 da. Basically, pick a human virtue, and I guarantee you can find somebody who assumes that our generation is the first generation to figure out how that works. But the thing of it is, humans have always been humans in every bit as complexity as they ever were, basically since the Stone Age. We've been the same species pretty much since the days that we huddled in caves for warmth or for spiritual purposes. Um, and there's an argument to be made that we're probably even pretty similar to the way we were when we were still apes living in trees. Humans have been human the entire time, which means there are no pure, unassailable, pure victims, and there are no mustache twirling villains of history. There are just people who did people things, and their various people things may or may not have inadvertently led to some good things or inadvertently led to some bad things. But the one thing you can be absolutely sure of is history doesn't, when it's accurately presented, fit neatly into the villains and victims narrative. It fits into the a bunch of humans being human narrative. Because the thing that you realize once you've actually researched history is how much things haven't changed, how much people have been basically the same people since time immemorial. Like for the funny example that I always bring up in these situations is they've done excavations of Pompeii, and one of the most hilarious things they found in Pompeii is graffiti on walls of some of the public buildings in Pompeii. And among the graffiti on the walls of Pompeii is random Greek or Roman name was here, written in Greek or Roman or Latin. And how long have human beings, therefore, been doing the X person was here joke? Because I'm fairly certain it was pretty much forever. And we've been doing that same sort of stuff pretty much forever. And we will always do that stuff. So stop with this. You must either be a pure put upon victim or a mustache twirling unassailable villain bullshit. Humans are more complex than that, and they've always been more complex than that. If you want to relate to these people, if you want to genuinely commemorate them as the human beings that they were, not as victims, not as villains, as people with their own worldviews and their own conceptions of how the world works. That is how proper history is done. Fuck your narratives, fuck your victimhood, fuck your villainy. Humans are humans and have always been humans. Get the fuck over it. Moving on.
Alright, but Mitchell recognizes a memorial's potential to create an uneasy balance between honoring the victims and monetizing their stories. What I want for Scotland is not to create just a tourist attraction, but for visitors to understand the heritage and what happened. I mean, look, let's be honest. The statue or memorial is always going. I mean, like, look at the war memorials we had in like Washington D.C. and shit.
Mm-hmm.
They're like they still have a way of honoring memory, sure, but they're also kind of, I guess, tourist attractions in a way.
Yeah.
No.
And let's be honest, if the people who were commemorated in that had their way, it probably still would be, because honestly, I think there's a misconception about people from history. A lot of people seem to think that just because we regard something as a tragedy, or just because something was a tragedy, means that the people who um, are being commemorated in these kind of statues want everyone to always be somber and commemorative. But honestly, again, because humans are humans, I imagine if you asked the average, war dead of the first couple world wars, would you rather make people miserable and sad, or would you rather bring people some kind of joy and make them interested in what your life history was and what you did? I'm betting 99.9% of them would be on the second team there, because it's more meaningful to actually give people some meaning, which sometimes includes joy, than it is to guilt trip people. And that's my fundamental issue with this. Stop using history to guilt trip people and start using history as a means to remind people what it means to be human and that we've always been human. Because all you're doing by fetishizing the victimhood of people from the past is making people believe that the past was somehow more pure and more decent than now is, which is wrong. And stop vilifying people from the past, because it has the opposite effect of making people believe the past was infinitely worse than now is, which is also wrong in most contexts. Yes, we made mistakes. Mistakes that we probably still will make a couple times more, because we're humans and we've been, again, the same pretty much since the Stone Age. But the most interesting story you can possibly tell, the one that actually deserves to be told and the one that probably should be commemorated, is the one that reminds people that they're not different from us. They're not backward savages who, had no idea how anything worked, and they're not pure martyrs that existed in some kind of utopian age from yesterday. What they are is people who are as well-rounded, as multifaceted, and as human as the people living today are. And if people could remember that, if that was the lens through which we chose to see history, I think we would do a lot more good for the world than we are currently doing by turning everything into victimhood and villainy. But what the fuck do I know? I'm just, an actual practitioner of this stuff that that you're virtue signaling about in this current microsecond. But I guess I don't get a vote, even though if we were living 500 years ago, I would probably be one of the first ones tied to the stake or tied to the noose. Never mind. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did I read the part she says adding memorials should be done in the correct way?
Hmm?
No, okay. It isn't easy to commemorate an atrocity, says Pulitzer Prize winner author Stacy Schiff, or yeah, I guess Schiff, in her essay First Kill the Witches, Then Celebrate Them on Salem's Witch-Inspired Tourism Industry. Of Salem's drumming up tourism dollars from its grim past, she writes, the city transmuted its secret shame into its saving grace.
Yes, and in my humble opinion, that was a good thing. And that is the kind of history that can actually be meaningful to people. But by stripping things down to either victim or villain, all you're doing is making history not relatable. And people don't remember history they have no point of reference for or can't relate to. People remember things about the past that they find interesting and compelling because that's the part of them, or that's the part of history that reminds them that those people you read about in books, your Benjamin Franklins, your George Washingtons, even your, Salem townsfolk or your accused witches were as human and as multifaceted as I am. That is something that I think we need to teach people in history more than we need to teach them these dates happened or these wars happened or these people were victims of these people. Teach them that humans have always been and always will be humans. So the people you're reading about were just as complex as you are. That's an interesting story to tell. And honestly, you get a lot closer to that by let's take this awful thing that happened and turn it into a positive and turn it into a means to apologize for what we did than you will by let's wallow in guilt for what we did for another 200 fricking years. Moving on.
Uh, for all its witch catch, uh, Salem is one of the few places that has properly recognized its history. In the decades following the witch trials, accusers officially apologized for the events of 1692. 300 years later, Salem erected a memorial to its victims, and by 2002, Massachusetts had exonerated all the accused.
Again, they've already done the thing you're asking for. So why are you still bitching? Moving forward.
Alright, tourism business has been touched to modern day witches now lead walking tours that explain the true history and dispel the stereotypes. Okay.
Or how about instead of trying to actively dispel the stereotypes, you can explain where they come from? Because just because this is the other thing. Ignoring history is not a good way of commemorating it. Instead of refusing to acknowledge these stereotypes, why don't you actually look into the history of where they come from so that that can also become a part of the history you're working with? Because, again, in my experience, the things that I find most compelling about history are the things that remind me, oh, hey, these were fully well-rounded people that actually existed and actually had lives and interests just like everyone else does. But by transposing them and making them these mythical figures of either saintly victimhood or ridiculous evil, all you're doing is removing their humanity away from them and making it harder to actually teach people history because nobody likes a one-dimensional character. And if you turn historical figures into one-dimensional characters, you will make history one of the most boring subjects to study. And that's why 99% of people raised primarily in the modern day educational system hate the shit out of history because unless you have a really, really good history teacher or you have the kind of mind that allows you to research stuff on your own time and in your own way, um, you will hate history and the way it is taught in the modern educational system. Why don't we fix that instead of whining once again about victimhood for the women for the 500th time today? Moving forward.
Give me a sec. The tourism business has been touched. I read that. Sorry. This contradiction is also too familiar to Christian J. Soley in her new book, Witch Hunt. She narrates the experience of visiting places associated with witch trials and those of interest to self-identified witches, such as herself. After years of research, she writes, she is well versed in the internal conflict that witch tourism inspires. Dalton?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as a practicing occultist of 15 years, what is your view on witch tourism and your view on this witch, her, uh, in her view, I guess?
Again, my perspective on witch tourism is essentially good because again, if anything is going to stick it to the man of 1692 or whatever, it's going to be not only are we going to shun your backwards traditionalistic bullshit, we're going to embrace and lionize the very thing you were afraid of all those years and show exactly how and why you were so stupid for fearing it all those years. Just like if I could talk to Jacob Springer and Heinrich Kramer, most of my conversation with them would probably be laughing at their asses for not understanding what actual witchcraft is. That to me is a more constructive route than let's wallow in the victimhood for the 500th time today. Not saying the victimhood didn't happen, but I am saying if we ever want it to actively not have power over us, then let's exercise power over it. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. One chapter describes Triora, Italy, where, as in Salem, the commercial side is off-putting, although she found it beset by commercialism. At the same time, there were beautiful rituals and real community efforts to memorialize the witch hunt here, says Soli. So it's just like Salem, veering between the somber and the salacious.
Again, I'm not sure why commercialism is such a big issue for you. Would you rather no one be allowed to make money from this? And if a significant proportion of the people making money from this are actual practitioners, then surely that should get the seal of approval, if nothing else. Like, people like Lori Cabot, make money from the Salem witch movement. People like the folks over at the Hermetic Arts and Learning Center, which I swear to God one of these days I will actually visit because I have actually never physically been to Salem and I need to fix that at some point in the near future. But when I go, one of the first shops I'm going into is going to be the Hermetic Arts and Learning Center because A, it's one of the more out of the way places, and B, it's a lot more, for lack of a better word, hardcore magic than the love and light, fluffy bunny, new agey stuff. Which, not saying it isn't valid, not saying I've never met anyone who does that stuff that knows their shit, but given my preferences for scholarly and intellectual, you know, challenge and expertise, I'm much more in the hermetic vein than the new agey woo woo vein. Anyway, moving forward.
Yeah, so that was the end of that article. Moving on to the second one, which might be a little more upbeat for our palate cleanser before we move on to the third one.
Yeah, I picked something out specifically for Brainstormer this week, and it is very stupid.
I'll be honest, the third one I wasn't sure about covering myself. Like I saw it going all over, I wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get there. Yeah, okay, so this from comicbook.com. Trick or Treat Trick or Treat's Quinn Lord on the impact that playing Sam has had on him. It's written by Russ Burlingham, and
Hmm.
it was published 20 uh, October 22nd, 2021. Figured you wanted to cover something like this, Don.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in case I don't get a chance to watch Trick or Treat this year, which come hell or high water, I will find a way. But in case I don't, you can't have Halloween post like 2007 without at least acknowledging everybody's favorite seasonal goblin.
Hmm. Okay. Quinn Lord is an acclaimed and fan favorite actor now, with credits like Man in High Castle and Firefly Lane under his belt. But there's one role that he has been living with since he was 7 years old, and that's the role of Sam from the cult horror favorite uh, Trick or Treat.
Yeah, it's my favorite Halloween movie specifically because it is in the respect the lore, goddamn you vein.
Wow, he's
And
only like a year. He's a year older than me.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
no.
the movie came out in like I want to say 2007, but it might have been 2009.
Well, no, he's 22 now. He was born in February. I'm born in November, so he has
A
huh,
couple months on you, basically.
yeah. But yeah, that's kind of cool. All right. Set in the fictional town of Warren Valley, Ohio. The movie is an anthology horror film helmed by Michael Daugherty, who would go on to direct Krampus and Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Sam was a pint-sized terror, a strangely costumed trick-or-treater who has supernatural ability and seems fixed on enforcing a version of Halloween that conforms to his vision.
Well, he's a goblin, so they kind of do that.
Mm-hmm. Contrary to what you may think, playing a demonic trick or treater at 7 years old did not bother Lord much. Instead, he seems pleased at the idea of his younger self being able to be both innocent and sinister, and he loves encountering the fans of the movie, even if a lot of them have the same observation to share afterwards.
Everybody loves playing the villain, and I'm glad to see this kid was able to get on the it's fun playing the villain team, even that young.
Mm-hmm.
I think we would have gotten along.
All right. I matured quickly. I matured quite quickly, so I just doing some not so kid like stuff when I was younger. Lord, told comic book. I'm pretty sure that kind of helped me secure the role of Sam, so I could be sinister but cute at the same time. So yeah, as far as having trick or treat be during my childhood and all that, and growing up with that being there, people ask me about it increases as I go to conventions and things. There's just more and more people asking about it and about a potential sequel. As far as the sequel goes, you'd probably have to ask Michael Daugherty. He's probably the most up to date on that. I know probably as much as you guys do, but I'm definitely hoping for a sequel because the first one is a hell of a lot of fun to film. Since I've grown up since then, I can't imagine this one would be any less fun to film. And yeah, it is kind of odd that it's something I did when I was 7, and people are coming up to me and asking about it and talking about it, saying, "Hey, I loved you in that," and they're like saying, "Oh, you're so tall as well." That's a weird experience, but it's a really pleasant experience to see how people are so hyped up and love the movie.
Yeah, you made a classic, dude. It's one of those. You got lucky, and one of your earliest movies was probably the one you'll be remembered for. Um, sadly though, I don't think if a um
Yeah, he actually brings it up.
Yeah, if a sequel to Trick or Treat ever came out, it probably wouldn't be him because Michael Dougherty has done comics, which yay, about Trick or Treat, and basically Sam always looks like a diminutive child because he's a goblin in disguise, basically.
Um, um, of course, the conceit of Sam as a demon child who presumably never grows up could present some challenges along the way, but Lord would still not be able to say no to taking part in any potential follow up. Uh,
Honestly, I think it'd be fun to see him come back, but as a different character.
yeah, that
Um,
would be it.
like if he played a character similar to the school principal that was actually like a murderer
Mhm.
in the first one, or something similar to that, that'd be cool. But please, for the love of God, don't make him transgress Sam's rules if you ever do bring him back. Instead, have him be kind of like the boyfriend in the first skit, who actually loves Halloween and um, who knows the lore, because that would be really interesting to have, you know, this adult Halloween fanboy come across Sam and they just sort of look at each other and like even you could even have them like smile at each other. That'd be so adorable. Because that's the other thing, and they've delved into this in the comics, but if you abide by the rules, not only does Sam leave you alone, but he kind of considers himself a guardian of you in the comics. So that would be cute seeing Sam's more um protective, guardianish side.
Mhm. Uh, if I do not end up coming back for if I do end up coming back for a Trick or Treat sequel, it would be kind of strange, I'll admit, because I used to be like 3 feet tall as Sam when I was 7. I don't know. Perhaps they could use the same methods as Lord of the Rings to shorten me, but I think that's a little bit of a long shot.
Yeah, I just bring him back and have him play a different character. Um, and again, my vote would be somebody who knows the lore and who knows and who loves Halloween and is basically a Halloween fanboy, so that you can have Sam's more protective side going.
Hmm.
Because even in the Sam gets well and truly mad scene with the Halloween Scrooge at the end of the first one, he ended up giving the guy chance after chance, and only when it became obvious this guy was not on board at all did Sam try to do bad things to him, and even then, um, he was called off pretty easily by just the vague gesture of trick or treating ish.
Hmm. You can see Lord now and Ike Boys available on digital now. Trick or Treat is currently streaming on HBO Max and Hulu with a premium subscription.
Okay, so that's where I can find it. I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet and order it off of Hulu. Although I think I can also find it on YouTube for free if I pay a little bit, I think.
Hmm.
Because yeah, like I say, it's my favorite Halloween movie, and it feels weird celebrating a season without it. And someday I'm gonna get the comics, but I can never like I always think about asking for them for Christmas, but it always feels weird to ask for a Halloween themed thing for Christmas. So yeah.
You could ask on your birthday.
But that also feels weird because right in the middle of I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet and order it myself one of these years
Hmm.
around the actual time.
I'd honestly do it a week before October.
That'd be nice.
Um, hmm, Still loading. Yeah, so I'm just going to share it now. I'm sure I'll stop loading soon. This is from pinknews.co.uk. Dawn sent this to me. Halloween's bone chilling villain Michael Myers is Homophobic in new film. This is written by Maggie Basca, published October 20th, 2021.
Okay, and the long and the short of this is, no, he is not, because homophobia requires a particular distaste for gay people, or for anyone within the homosexual spectrum. Michael Myers, if he is anything, is misanthropic, meaning he hates everyone, probably on some level, including himself. Because the thing about Michael Myers is he's not really even a murderer character. He is murder incarnate. Like, he's not a character with motivations or with a code,
Literally
even.
referred to as the Shape. Like that is the actual name in like the original credits for Michael Myers. Like in the
Yeah,
original Halloween movie. Like if you look at the title, if you look at the end credits, in the casting, it's literally he's literally said to be the Shape. He has no personality, no nothing. He's just the
an
boogie.
empty vessel filled with murder, basically.
Yeah,
Um,
he's just the boogeyman.
yeah, it's it's the difference between Michael Myers and
Freddy
um, somebody like Freddy or Hannibal Lecter or the
or Pinhead.
Jigsaw Killer or
Pinhead.
or yeah, somebody like that. They are characters who are murderers because they have motivations and personalities apart from that. Michael, however, has no such thing. He is murder incarnate. Like, it's honestly, and everyone who knows me knows this was coming. If there was a real life equivalent to the Corinthian from the Sandman franchise, a living dream that was supposed to show humanity everything wrong with itself, it's Michael Myers. Like, Michael Myers is the more accurately and directly translated version of what Dream was apparently going for when he made the Corinthian in the Sandman mythos. Um, because there is no murderer inside Michael. He is simply murder.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wanted to put a label on him as though he was a human, the term you're looking for would be misanthrope. He hates everyone, probably including himself.
Yeah. Gruesome murder of a gay couple in Halloween Kills has resulted in some horror films calling the villain Michael Myers homophobic.
He
Motherfucker,
probably,
everyone in
yeah.
the movie, I assume, because I haven't seen it, but I've seen like the kill count and stuff for it.
I've seen it.
I heard it wasn't. I heard it didn't. It wasn't good. Apparently,
Not as good as the first one. It has a nice camp factor to it that I liked.
mm.
Um,
I remember like the cinematography looked good from the trailer we saw.
yeah, it was about as good as you can expect from the trailer. But in this particular scene, um, he there is no indication whatsoever that he even understood that they were gay. Because that's
Well,
the other thing.
remember what
He's
Loomis said in the first Halloween movie? You know, the 1978 one, or is it? No, it's 78. 78.
I believe. Okay,
I'm gonna look that up real quick. But like, he described Michael as really not having any concept of like humanity at all. Thus, he could not understand something. Hold on, I want to read the exact words.
mhm.
Plus, Dr. Loomis was really a cool character. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I wish they had put more focus on him throughout the series, but they didn't.
Yeah, one sec.
Because like if they had ended up like giving um a role similar to what Laurie had in the previous movie to Loomis, I think that would have been interesting.
Okay, okay. Hold on. I don't have the voice of the actor who Donald Pleasance.
Hmm.
Um, so it's not going to be as captivating as when he said it.
Mm.
But just for this, like to explain that this is completely false and idiotic. I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding in even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, good or, good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year old child with this blank, pale, motionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up. Because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Now, mind you, this is coming from a psychologist, and they are basically all but forbidden from ever even using the word evil in their diagnoses and practices. So, if Michael has pushed him to this point, then that means that we can damn near take it as an objective fact. Because in every other context we've seen Dr. Loomis, he's not even seen as like the stern, like Nurse Ratchety type of um psychiatrist. He's seen as the very like sympathetic psychiatrist, like almost a Robin Williams from Good Will Hunting level of like sympathy for his patient. Um, and so for a man that kind-hearted and that clinically bound to not use the word evil, to break and use that word is quite a definitive thing.
Yeah,
Moving forward,
yeah. I'll actually read the article. The long-running Halloween franchise was largely focused on the effects of Myers and his rampages on the Stroke family. It's not Stroke, is it? Strode.
Strode family
Okay.
editor.
Yep. And Halloween Kills is no exception to that tradition. The film is a direct sequel to 2018's Halloween, which ended with the mass killer being trapped in protagonist Laurie Strode's. Like they literally.
Editor.
Oh my god, burning house. Strode's burning house. However, fans find out in the new movie that the serial killer escaped the burning house with help from firefighters, who he eventually killed and proceeded to go on a murderous rampage. Right. Sorry. Yeah, I got nothing to say to that. I mean, it's Michael Myers. He kills him.
Yeah, it's just a summation of what happened.
Yeah, he also kills anyone, no matter what.
Yeah, like his like the only thing resembling humanity he has left is the impulse to kill. There's no
There are some things like in certain like scenes from various movies of the Halloween franchise. It shows that Michael can be a bit theatrical,
yeah.
and like if you remember in the first movie when he killed he's somewhat tactical in his killings as well.
Okay, so yeah, he has I think it's safe to say the mindset of a child because that was the last time he was human. So he has like maybe you could argue a child's sense of whimsy or a child's sense of not
We
wanting to get caught with your hands in the cookie jar, but apart from that.
right. You remember when he killed that guy by impaling him with a knife and like having him stuck there, like in the first Halloween movie?
Hmm.
He like they show for a brief moment that he is like it's sort of admiring the kill as well. Like it's bits of humanity. Like I don't think he's like a full human, obviously.
No, but there's echoes of a lost child somewhere deep in the recesses there.
Yeah. At one point in Halloween Kills, Mike Myers returns to his childhood home and finds an unsuspecting gay couple living there. The men, who are named Big John and Little John, realize someone is in their home and search for the intruder. But instead of making it out alive, they're murdered by Myers. because
Like everybody fucking else ever.
yeah, like literally he killed. It's called Halloween Kills too.
That the kills is sort of in there.
My God, y'all got fucking issues if you like. Okay, I could get it if it's like an active killer of the slasher genre. Again, Han, well, not Hannibal because that doesn't really count, but Freddy Krueger. I was gonna say, well, maybe Ghostface.
Like someone for whom there is a character, like a person committing the act of murder rather than a murder committing the act of person, basically.
Yeah,
Um,
I was
that's
gonna, I was gonna say, Pinhead, but they're like the Cenobites are sadomasochists.
yeah, the Cenobite or Leviathan definition of pleasure and pain. It honestly, it's sort of because of their philosophy and because of their point of reference. It's kind of hard to tell which side they're on in any given moment. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, they're super sadomasochists. Like
yeah.
I,
Demons to some, angels to others.
oh my God, that was such a cool scene. Like, it's one of the best in like the whole
Yeah.
franchise.
Honestly, I kind of wish they had stuck to it a little bit more because later on in the series it gets more straight up they're just demons. But honestly, I like the idea that when you get down to it or up to it rather, pleasure and pain, there's very little distinction. So of course, spiritual beings sometimes probably wouldn't know. I I like the idea that instead of just being evil, they're doing it because they're just that detached from what it is to be human.
Which is funny because they were human at one
It,
point.
yeah, it's if nothing else a testament to the like alchemical transmutive properties of hell in that universe,
Yeah.
which I like.
Okay. The scene stirred up discussion on Twitter. Many people accused and projected on something that wasn't meant to be projected on.
As is usually the case, yes.
Yeah, the scene stirred up discussion on Twitter with some people, probably tongue in cheekily, labeling Michael Myers homophobic for killing the couple. And here we see a few tweets.
This would require a few things. Number one, a person to actually be committing this act, which there is barely anything resembling a human there.
Again,
Number two, understanding that they are gay, which if we are to assume that Michael is trapped in the mind of a murderous adolescent child, um, then do we even like does he even have an understanding of what sex is? Bearing in mind that he was locked in a mental institution for his entire puberty and probably wasn't allowed to explore that shit very easily.
um, there was also the thing where, like, I remember this theory that said that he gets triggered, so to speak, like mentally triggered or
Yeah,
psychotically triggered by
yeah,
sex.
like a PTSD flash, basically.
Yeah. Granted, I don't. I think that's what it started as, and then he just became essentially evil.
Yeah,
Just,
it's
just the hate.
he's murder wearing a skin suit. He's not a person committing the act of murder. He's murder trying to commit the act of person.
Yeah. I also heard that, and feel free to call on this. This is a sidebar itself. I heard they pushed more for the supernatural angle of Michael Myers in Halloween Kills.
I didn't really see it, but I mean, maybe. And if that is the case and I missed it, then I'm gonna have to watch that again and view it with fresh eyes because, as everyone knows, that's my shit. But
Well, like him becoming more of the boogeyman and less more like a legend boogeyman, like like how a serial killer can be.
like how Freddy made a bargain with dream demons to become what he is.
Sorta. Granted, I wouldn't prefer. I would prefer that they don't like. They did that more in like the original series with like the Cult of Thorn and stuff.
Yeah, when Michael was resurrected and the resurrection of Mike, like I liked when it's so obvious as to be redundant here, but generally speaking, I like whenever any series goes for a more supernatural angle, but I understand the impetus for Michael not to be that. And honestly, if you want a killer who is something like that, then you have, Pinhead, um, Freddy, the Djinn from the Wishmaster series. Um, there are beings who are effectively forces of nature, and even Jason Voorhees, I think, is confirmed to be a literal zombie, like revenant zombie.
I
So
would honestly just say zombie, because zombie would imply. Granted, if we're doing more contemporary zombie and not and less voodoo zombie, Jason is more of a ghoul. No, a revenant, because a revenant, if I remember correctly, is a spirit or
possessed with a mission, basically. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah. So if Jason Voorhees is arguably a literal supernatural zombie. Mike, um, Freddy is possessed by dream demons and a ghost that he made, deals with, and so on. Pinhead is essentially the leader of the army of Leviathan. Like there are those sorts of
He's
characters.
a hell priest. That's what he's called.
Yeah. To yeah, there are those sorts of characters if that's what you want. And I sort of understand the desire for Michael not to be that, mostly because honestly, um, if we're going to make him a supernatural entity, I would prefer we just kind of make him. I prefer just kind of leaning into the idea of the shape, like maybe he is literally murder that decided to take on a human form in kind of a platonic way. Um, that makes a lot more sense than he made some deal with a demon or he's a ghost or blah 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 blah. Blah. Like that, it's honestly more interesting to have him just be murder as a character. In the same way that it's interesting in Sandman when the characters you're working with are literally every single destiny anyone ever has, literally death itself, literally every dream, ambition, or nightmare anyone ever has, literally every desire anyone ever has, literally every despair, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Um, so, so like I can understand the desire to make Michael a like platonic character, but don't give him some like don't do to him what you did to Freddy and make him have some sort of demonic like destiny or he's a harbinger of the apocalypse or whatever. Just
And don't feel free to disagree with me because I feel like you might with this. I kind of like the fact that I like the idea is like the supernatural element of Michael Myers being the shape is kind of
mhm.
ambiguous, which adds kind of more to the intrigue and mystique about the shape.
um I can take it or leave it either way, to be honest with you.
Like I don't
I
like
I don't think it should ever be. I don't think there should ever be an exposition scene talking about it. Like it shouldn't be
that's what I said.
like
That's what I
it
meant.
shouldn't be like The Mask. It shouldn't be like Jim Carrey's The Mask, where Ben Stein shows up and says, "Oh yes, the
That's what I said.
yeah."
That's what I meant.
hmm But it can definitely be like alluded to in like I don't know
Yeah, that's what I meant.
comics or stories or whatever. Yeah.
Like the thing with like Michael Myers that really made him terrifying, like in the first Halloween movie, or like at least frightening, was that you didn't know how you just didn't know much about him.
hmm
Like that air of mystery.
He's more of a force of nature and less of a person. Is the
Yeah. Like how did he know how to drive? By being in a mental hospital since he was a boy. You know?
hmm
Uh he's clearly like a master, like I said, like a master tactician. Like he was able to block off things in the theatrics and stuff.
he's good. He's good at reading people and he's good at setting up a scene. Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Very Joker, kinda.
Yeah.
Anyway. Fans also drew comparisons between the treatment of LGBT plus people in Halloween Kills and the new Chucky TV series. This show features a scene in which the evil doll shows the acceptance of his gender fluid and queer child. I haven't seen the new series, but I know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's a reference to the fact that when they made Chucky have a kid, they made a reference to Glenn and Glenda, which is a very heavy, like, Friends movie.
Yeah. Fuck, I had something. Sorry. I mean, to be fair, they were like two souls stuck in one doll, like legitimately just two people stuck in one body.
Hmm.
And when they were conceived, they were literally twins. So
Hmm.
it's
So if anything, we're talking about someone who's literally two-spirit.
or yeah. Plus, Chucky's an asshole and kind of hates everyone.
Except for apparently his kids and his wife, mostly, so yay.
Oh no, he killed them too.
Oh yeah. But to be fair with them, it's a little bit less extreme because he knows he can usually bring them back.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how much do we blame Cain and the Sandman for killing Abel when he knows Abel's just gonna come back again?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's at that point, it's literally just go away because I don't want to deal with you right now.
Yeah. All right. The USA and Sci-Fi show follows Jake. This is a Chucky TV series. I skipped past like the tweets because I honestly just didn't want to read them. They're very stupid.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the USA and Sci-Fi show follows Jake, a teen who knowingly buys Chucky at a yard sale. He eventually confronts the killer doll after he reads the teen's diary and discovers his crush on a classmate named Devin. However, Chuck reveals that he has his queer child. Again, technically, he just has two kids now. If we're going by the canon,
Well, but if they're in one body, then it's sort of the term on the
so, like like yeah, in the doll, but they're not in the doll anymore. They were literally voodoo conceived children now, like legit actual kids now.
okay, that's
You'd have to watch Seed of Chucky.
interesting. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, so the scene doesn't really make sense now looking at the canon.
Hmm.
Also, we never see those kids ever again. This is like the only mention of them.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it's one of those sometimes in these slasher series, the plot threads just get dropped and might come back later if somebody finds a interesting angle on them, or they might not ever.
I mean, okay, because look, Glenn was kind of the more kind-hearted, good person, while Glenda was literally a chip off the old block of Chucky and
Yeah, Daddy Dearest there.
yeah, and Tiffany.
Hmm.
Um, However, Chucky reveals that he has his queer child. Jake asks if the doll is cool with it, to which Chucky responds, "I'm not a monster, Jake." I mean, kind of is though. In more,
Well, I mean, if he's making like the distinction between monster and murder, and actually that's kind of a real thing. Like you'll see a lot of times if somebody gets convicted of doing something really, really awful, the people that are the hardest on him are the sociopaths because they can compartmentalize the stuff they do from their own system of morality, such that they still consider themselves good people even though they do terrible things.
yeah, the whole "I'm not the bad guy," like I'm a villain, but I'm not a monster kind of deal.
Yeah.
It's a classic thing, I know. But in Sea of Chucky, like he said, he wanted a boy.
Yeah, he had to get used to it, but at least he did get used to it.
And when did Sea of Chucky come out?
Wasn't that long ago, but it was long enough ago.
Well, I know. I just want to look up the timeline because if this takes place in modern day, like right now, this year.
Mm-hmm.
2004. And at the end of the movie, they did a time skip where the kids were like, I don't know, 5 or something. So that was 5 years. So that would have been 2009. So by 2021, they should be, I don't know, late teens, early 20s, maybe.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Either way, is my point being made. Uh, is that okay? Yeah, I agree. Maybe that time he had time to think about it and stuff. Fine. It's just again like at first he was not cool with it, but then again he's like a serial killer from I don't know the 80, late 80s or something.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, shit happens and all that. I don't know.
It's been a minute since he was Charles Lee Ray, so yeah.
Yeah. Despite some of the possibly tongue-in-cheek grumbles online, Halloween Kills has been a big hit in the run-up to Halloween and slashed its way to the top of the weekend box office with a $50.4 million debut.
Although to be fair, it fell like 80% in its second weekend, which is not a good sign for the movie, but never mind. And final thing of the night here. Oh, I don't know why I'm tired. I didn't get up until like 3:30 today.
So I was setting things up.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're continuing a video, well, a second video to the one from last week, which is top 5 scariest gods in history. This is part 2. If you want to see part 1, go check out last week, which is Podcast the Storm number 137. Yeah,
Yep. We're almost at 40. That's weird. 140.
yep. This is also, yeah, so this is from top 5 scary videos. Um, 10 minutes. So, shall we jack-o'-lantern, my dear friend?
We shall indeed, Jack-o'-lantern.
Mythology, our favourite way to descend into the shared fears and superstitions of ancient cultures and civilizations, and metaphysically portray them as an all-powerful cosmic deity that often got their kicks in meddling with the affairs of us mere mortals down in the playful plane of Earth. Well, if you've already seen the first part of this video, you'll know that for the most part, mythology has given us some of the most badass female warrior deities / incredibly powerful spell-slinging witches and
Okay, my only issue there is with his summation, or the actual beings that these cultures were inspired by, interacted with, and worshipped. Because I don't like the it was all just metaphor approach to this bullshit. Like, no, these beings.
Look, I'm willing to let that slide, mainly because like not a lot of people are like.
Yeah, I know, but it's my job to be pedantic in this particular field, so I'm just doing my job.
Fair enough. I will be right back. I am going to get something to drink, so my throat will not be parched from talking.
Okay. Yeah, my 2 cents is these were and still are in many cases beings that people interact with, so it's a little bit honestly dismissive and childish to just go, it was all just metaphor, it had no semblance of reality whatsoever, especially given one of the people or beings on this list that I am kind of contractually bound to defend the metaphoric honor of. So there's that. I'm literally on the metaphoric payroll here, so there's that. And so we wait. There are not nearly enough good Halloween songs to actually sing along to. Like, Monster Master's fun to dance to, but I can never remember all the lyrics to it. And now we're just waiting on Brainstormer. Come, little children, I'll take thee away into a land of enchantment. Come, little children, the time's come to play here in my garden of shadows. Follow, sweet children, I'll show thee the way through all the pain and the sorrows. Weep not, poor children, that life is this way, murdering beauty and passion. Fret not, dear children, it must be this way, to weary of life and deception. Fret not, dear children, for soon we'll away into the calm and the quiet.
I've returned.
Just in time.
Yeah, I was making chocolate milk.
Aha.
Yeah, I don't.
Another one of those odd American staples that I don't particularly like very much. I can almost feel you staring in that perplexed look.
No, it was more just disappointment. I was like, what the fuck?
Adding it to the list of confusing stuff.
Uh-huh. Alright, okay, so shall we?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Some of the most badass female warrior deities / incredibly powerful spell-slinging witches, and also Zeus was hella messed up. But thankfully for us, in the dusty tomes of time-old ritualistic practices, there are many more mythological gods where that came from. So let's take a look. Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, top 5 scary videos. And
I don't know, I think there are some much more scarier, specifically ones that make like horror short films. I really like those.
Yeah. I think, especially given that that these guys don't even limit it to the top 10, but specifically down to the top 5. I think a lot of the ones that were nominated last time could have been skipped, and we talked about it last week.
Yeah.
So if you want a further explanation of that, go and watch the previous episode.
I won't lie. I watched mostly their top 10. You know, they actually have like I've seen a few of these videos. Actually, like they're like they have do like a top 5 angels, like a series of angels scarier than demons.
Yeah, I've seen that one. I've also seen the top 5 demons you should never summon, which always makes me giggle a little bit because they usually end up going for the nice ones. Like or at least somewhere intermixed in there. There are some that are actually kind of just chill.
I think most people just can't really get the idea that beings of other planes are basically as flawed and kind of fucked up as us.
Yeah, nature is complicated, and therefore the beings that sort of oversee and comprise it are also complicated. Who knew?
Yeah. Yeah. I mostly watch their top 10 nerd videos though.
I tend to watch the ones that are like, the top 10 real X thing. Like I avoid most of the fiction ones. I did look at their top 10 fictional gods that or top 5 fictional gods one once, and they included Despair of the Endless, and they did give a nice shout out to the fact that basically all of the Endless can have their moments except for Death. Death is cool. And so much so that I think she outshines her brother in terms of fandom a lot of the time.
Probably.
Yeah. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
As per usual, I'll be your horror host, Jack Finch, as today we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest mythological gods in history, part 2. Cheers, Robert the Dude. Roll the clip. For the curious,
Yeah, I knew that was from Vikings.
Yeah.
Human ancient ritual for like war or something.
Yeah, I've never actually watched more than one episode of Vikings, so I can't really have a point of reference for it, but I'm sure it explains in the context of the show because that show is supposedly really good. But jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah. God, my eyes. Sorry, my eyes were itchy. Jack-o'-lanterns.
amongst you, that clip was, of course, from the awesome History Channel TV series Vikings, depicting the unstoppable Lagertha in a ritualistic blood sacrifice to the Aesir Frey. And she looks rather happy in doing so, doesn't she? The thing is, though, it leads us to mention an important point, because ancient history has long since demonized the practices of countless cultures, and it is in fact one of the main reasons why many of the gods on
the And it being Frey is interesting to me because I know, like, the Norse pantheon isn't my go-to pantheon for working with or anything, but I know quite a bit about Norse pantheon, especially because I'm a big fan of the YouTuber Orithegr and also Ocean Keltoy. Even though I don't think Ocean and I would get along politically very well. I still respect the hell out of his content, and ditto for Orithegr. Although if I'm honest, I think Orith has Ocean beat just a little bit because he is a little bit more directly academic about things, and he's also a magic practitioner, so he has that angle that I don't think Ocean directly practices any sort of magic along with his paganism, but I could be wrong. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns. Whenever Brainstormer comes back.
Sorry, I had to toss my cup away. Like I left as soon as you said jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah. Okay.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Indeed.
One of the main reasons why many of the gods on this list are deemed scary, because, well, it's all a matter of perspective, really. Well, except for the ones that slit your belly open and stuff it with straw and pebbles. There's no coming back from that kind of reputation. Kicking off at number 5, Sekhmet. And this is the first time that we're heading down into the underbelly of ancient Egyptian mythology, with one of its lesser-known deities.
Yeah, I in the way back days, I considered myself an adherent to the Egyptian gods, so yeah, I know enough about Sekhmet to know. Yep, she's qualified to be on this list.
Sekhmet.
Goddess of war and the dark side of the goddess Hathor, who is the goddess of love.
If I remember, the Egyptian pantheon had like dark. Had there was a dark reflection of gods, right? Like shadows, I guess.
Sort of. Not. I mean, there were definitely gods that could probably be considered evil, like Apep or Apophis, or to a certain extent Set. Although I think Set gets demonized as the devil of the Egyptian pantheon a little bit too much. He's not as chill as Loki, but he's not quite as mustache twirling as like the Titanic animated series made him out to be. That being said, he is still fucking horrifying. But in Hathor and Sekhmet's case, there's some debate amongst Egyptologists that whether they're separate gods or whether they're one god with two faces, because it's sort of implied in some versions of the story that when Hathor is angered beyond all reason, she becomes Sekhmet. But then again, there are other versions of the story where they just happen to be separate deities, and sometimes they're considered sisters. So it's one of those. It really depends on how far back you want to dig and what iteration of the story you want to go with. I'm sort of 50-50 on this. Hathor and Sekhmet were never deities that I personally had any desire to have any interest in. So I'm kind of flying blind as far as that goes. I do know stories in mythology about Sekhmet that suggested that she could only be appeased by being fed wine made of red ochre because it looked like blood. And if she wasn't appeased, she would literally turn the Nile red with blood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
But also perhaps is most violently ferocious. Now, it's no kept secret that the ancient Egyptians had a bit of a thing for death and disembowelment, but that particular torturous method of pain is best reserved for the legendary deity Sekhmet, the fiercest huntress amongst all of the Egyptian divinities. Sekhmet was often depicted as a lioness, and she was bestowed upon...
Let him finish. Jack-o'-lanterns.
The titles, The One Before Whom Evil Trembles, Mistress of the Dead, Lady of Slaughter, and She Who Mauls. That's a pretty hefty resume, right? But nevertheless, she's a badass. Sekhmet was a solar deity and thus fell under the order of Ra, king of all the Egyptian gods. As the legend goes, Sekhmet was sent by Ra to kill a cabal of demons that were still lurking within the kingdom of Egypt, as well as...
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't technically sound bad, but...
You really don't want to get in her way when she's doing this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll end up looking like Castiel after Lucifer snaps his fingers in Supernatural.
Maybe even worse.
Probably.
Oh, God, I'm sorry. My eyes are like... Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
within the kingdom of Egypt, as well as their numerous mortal cults and secret orders who had instigated countless wars and other forms of discord upon mankind. Well, it turned out that Sekhmet had a thing for spilling blood, and with the first sign of battle, she fell into an animalistic frenzy, causing so much death, destruction, and bloodshed that the Nile itself overflowed in a crimson red.
Yep. That part's accurate to the mythology.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine you're beginning to see why I never had anything to do with this bitch.
I wouldn't call her a bitch, but okay.
Well, no, I'm being cheeky, but yeah.
I don't think the gods would really be cool with the cheekiness, though.
I mean, some of them had better sense of humor. Although, as I'm saying it, she's probably not one, so I
Yeah.
apologize for that. But you must understand that for somebody like me who has no interest in war whatsoever, you're not the deity that I would probably best get along with. Thoth and I seem to still be on fairly good terms. I had a dream involving him the other night, which made me really kind of scratch my head because it was like, wait, I haven't done anything with the Egyptian gods for almost a decade. What the fuck are you doing here?
Anyway, shall we?
Yep, jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
And because of her blood-based environmental disaster, Ra forced her to clean it up and swallow all of the blood in the Nile, subsequently kicking off a 1,000-year tradition of warriors getting punch drunk on red wine after every great battle. What a legacy. Swinging in at number 4, Baron Samedi. And we're swinging over to the mythology of the lower...
Again, he deserves to be here in that he is a being of, death, but like
He's not
of the various death gods, the Baron strikes me as the kind of guy who would just be cool if you called him on an off day.
Yeah, like he I haven't looked much into it, and I want to. Like, I'm very interested in looking into this, but like, here's the thing with like a lot of death gods. Usually, they're actually kind of cool, in obviously more ways than one. But like, they're really cool people, like just people doing their jobs.
Yeah, because somebody has to make sure this living dead thing stays in some kind of order. Because it's kind of an important dichotomy to how the whole universe works and stuff. That being said, don't piss off the Baron because
Oh yeah,
he will be.
Like, I mean, that nobody's saying about like any god really. You don't piss them off.
Yeah. Vis-a-vis Aleister Crowley's demise, basically.
Yeah.
Dude summoned up a bunch of deities just to tell them to fuck themselves, and then immediately fell into a crippling opium addiction and died alone in a hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
So, yep.
Anyway, shall we?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Of Haitian voodoo for this one, with perhaps their most infamous orchestrator of the dead, Baron Samedi. Now, although there are copious lower deities, the principal chief of the dead is this guy, who holds a certain chaotic reverence over the comings and goings of the living and the dead. Also known throughout his numerous incarnations as Baron Cimetière, Baron Le Croix, and Baron Criminel, Samedi is often depicted...
It's why most people, when they're referring to him, just refer to him as the Baron. Because it makes it a lot easier when you're not singling out one of his particular aspects.
Yeah. I always gotta say, like, I love the art that they always do.
Yeah, they're good at choosing the visuals for things.
No. I just mean art in general for like the Baron,
But yeah, he, and I'm not saying this just because we share kind of a similar dress sense, but like, dude usually cuts a dashing figure.
Yeah. I think you would say like he might be one of the relatively newer gods, so to speak.
That gets into a lot of semantics that I am not qualified to comment on. I sort of I'm
Like I think the actual Baron has been around for a very long time. I'm not going to disagree with that. Like,
mhm,
but I mean, in more so the version of the Haitian voodoo
yeah. Oh,
religion.
yeah. Although it makes me a little bit confused and a little bit humorous that they singled out Haitian voodoo as though the practitioners of New Orleans voodoo don't acknowledge the Baron, which is just stupid.
Yeah, isn't there also like something known as hoodoo?
Hoodoo is specifically a kind of magic. Voodoo is a religion that has magic in it.
Oh, okay.
Um, I'm
Okay.
not beyond that. I'm not really like I find the Loa interesting, and I do want to look into sort of deeper voodoo sort of lore one of these days, but um, at least for now, it's sort of just outside of my purview, other than like comparatively. There's a lot of similarities that I've seen between what I know of voodoo and what I know of like um, American conjure or hoodoo or Appalachian magic or hex magic or all these various kinds of American folk magic, and I think there's a
Um,
lot of interrelation and overlap between them because they're all basically tribal tribal practices intermixed with like little bits and pieces of Catholicism mixed with like Native American beliefs mixed with like whatever the Europeans brought over from like their previous pagan roots and so on. So
I will say this again. I think in any depiction of the Baron, he dapper as fuck.
yeah, I again not to say that just because we share a dress sense or anything, but um I I can sort of see where his style comes from here.
Mm-hmm.
I I tip my hat to you, sir.
All right, shall we?
Yes, jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Dressed in a top hat with a black tailcoat, dark or lensless glasses, and cotton plugs in his nostrils, as if to resemble a corpse dressed and prepared for burial in the traditional Haitian style. He's brash, rude, fond of rum and tobacco, but also has a rogue-like charm to him and an incredibly wild sense of humour. It is often said that the Baron Samedi spends most.
Oh yeah, the Baron is one of the beings that if you want to make a deal with someone in this context, you'd probably be better off making a deal with him than some of the other, particularly the Puerto Loa. And he is one of those beings that apparently really likes being offered booze. So, I mean, there's that.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me. Like I'm not
Like,
saying the missive sense. It strikes me if it strikes me as something a man of his regalness, I would say, like a god of his.
yeah, he has good taste generally, and also yes, generally the finer the booze you can get, the better
He's
for the purposes of
a
making a
baron.
deal.
He's a baron, so
Yeah, even taking the god out of it, he's still a baron, but putting the god back into it, it's like, what are you going to offer a god? You're going to offer them the best you have to offer.
mhm,
So there's that. Yay.
yeah.
Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Baron's.
Most of his time in the invisible realm of voodoo, found at the mystical crossroads between the worlds of the living and the dead. For any soul that passes freely from this world, Baron Samedi has a freshly dug grave ready and waiting for them. And it's his business in ensuring that all corpses rot in the ground to stop any soul from being brought back as a brainless, flesh-hungry zombie. After all,
Oh, fun fact. That's actually where the term zombie comes from. Like
Yes.
actual Haitian
Yeah.
voodooism.
The term zombie is where it comes from.
If I remember correctly, it is actually like originally it was spelled XOMBI.
I believe so.
Either way, it's super interesting, and also like I wish we could get a little more of that like in mainstream media.
Hmm. And initially, like the early versions of the zombie were spirits that were like bound to bottles. The idea of using their own bodies and literally raising them up wasn't until later.
Like I would
But
so love to see, and like you and I think we discussed this like the first time we ever did a Halloween special, did the Halloween month,
hmm
and, like we talked about like a supernatural zombie film.
hmm
We like brainstormed one.
yeah,
Uh, you talked about like a supernatural zombie attack.
yeah.
Granted, at that time we never really brought up voodooism or anything like that. I think we
The word you're looking for is Voodoo, by the way.
Dawn.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, the original sort of variation of it was Voodoo.
yeah,
But yeah.
and I think that would be very interesting simply on the fact that you could also because the Baron in recent years, to my knowledge, has been brought to more prominence in certain shows. Uh, I think American Horror Story got to it a little more, or like
It,
the
yeah, so did Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Apparently, actually, the Baron and Zelda had a thing in the Sabrina verse.
oh okay.
Um, um, Also, when the people behind The Princess and the Frog were looking for aesthetics for Dr. Facilier, they based his look heavily on the Baron.
I thought that was just obvious from like from what he did to transform Nadine. You know when he put on that like
Yeah,
skull paint.
yeah. They actually did quite a lot of their homework for that movie, which
God, like that's one of my favorite movies. It's like my second. Actually, my first. Hunchback of Notre Dame is like my second
mm,
favorite movie. It's like one of those. It's like those movies that aren't technically Disney movies. They kind
hmm
of break the mold of Disney movies.
yeah. I miss the days when Disney bothered to do their own homework.
Yeah, but again, like the idea of like a supernatural zombie flick that might even and like what they just said here with like Baron Smetty's or no, the Baron, sorry, uh, the
Mhm.
Baron's involvement in the story would
Yeah,
be
it'd be interesting if like the protagonist had to actually go to a crossroads and literally summon up Baron and bargain with him to put everything back in order.
yeah, and plus like a part of me kind of wanted to think like again, it's like that whole thing with like people see a version of the god that they want to see.
Hmm.
You know, so like the form of the Baron will look very different compared to who's like seeing him.
Yeah, it's the energy involved sort of filters itself through your mind and your own frame of reference.
Hmm. Anyway,
Yep, jack-o'-lanterns.
jack-o'-lanterns.
It's an important job, and someone's got to do it. Cheers, Baron Samedi. Next up at number 3, Randa. How can we make this list without referencing perhaps the most evil force in the whole of the South Pacific? Randa, the demon queen of the Layaks. Now, in Balinese mythology, the Layaks are a horrifying race of humanoid monstrosities that take the form of a grotesque flying head seeping with human.
I've never heard of these.
I hadn't until this video, actually.
Huh.
So, yeah, this one's a new one on me.
Yeah.
I have yet to verify most of this.
Okay. I guess we're more just going to comment on what's being said here.
Yep,
Uh,
jack-o'-lanterns.
Hold on. Let me check the. Okay, let me put the down a bit more because I just put it back to. Okay, just so we can talk about it. All right. Yeah. Jack-o'-lanterns.
3. Rangda. Yeah, how could we make this list without referencing perhaps the most evil force in the whole of the South Pacific? Rangda, the demon queen of the Layaks. Now, in Balinese mythology, the Layaks are a horrifying race of humanoid monstrosities that take the form of a grotesque flying head seeping with human entrails, the heart, the lungs, and the liver. In mythology...
I feel like I've seen references to that, but I can't be too certain.
Yeah, I think I've seen references to her too, and even the name Rangda sounds familiar, but I didn't know much about her until here.
Does sound scary.
Yeah, it's one of those. I wouldn't want to see one of those coming at me from a dark alley sort of situations.
Dark alley. Try broad daylight. A flying head with human entrails and organs, like spewing out, is terrifying enough no matter what time of day or wherever you are.
But at least if I could be sure what I was seeing, that would take out some of the uncertainty. That's why it wouldn't bother me quite as much in broad daylight.
Yeah, well, you're also weird, so. And you're also a trained occultist, so you probably have a better chance of fighting that thing.
Or just making a circle and then staying in that circle until the thing fucks off.
Mm-hmm.
That would probably until I know more about the Balinese mystical system. My go-to approach is gonna be nope, fuck you, salt circle, and then until like I'm at most I might stick my tongue out at the thing and be like, nah, you can't penetrate a salt circle, la 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 la.
Dude, you don't taunt a supernatural entity, no matter what.
This is true, but if
I'm the one telling you that.
yes, and I'm pretty sure I've told you that before, but nevertheless.
No, you don't have to tell me that because I'm not stupid enough to do that, to attempt that.
If I'm genuinely cornered by something like that, I probably would just be like, nope, I'm not taking you in the least bit seriously because
Oh my god!
for what
have a death wish.
for one thing, beings like that tend to thrive off of fear. So if you just sort of like they either lose.
Okay, it is hard not to be afraid of a supernatural entity coming to kill you.
Well, do they kill you? We haven't heard that part yet.
I assume so, because Queen of Demons kind of, and also, okay, yeah, actually, that's a fair point. We kind of need to
Context.
I'm assuming because it said their mouth leak human entrails and organs, and therefore I'm assuming she eats them.
I assumed that was what they were made of. Like that they were some sort of being created out of a corpse, because usually in these sorts of mythologies, that's what most of these monsters are, is some version of a corpse that's been defiled and like amped up with magic.
Okay, shall we?
Yep. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Mythology, they were thought to be humans who had practiced black magic and cannibalism in the name of their queen, the widow witch Rangda. She often takes the form of a wretched, mostly nude old woman with a long tangle of hair, claws, fangs, and bulging red eyes. Rangda serves in direct opposition to the king of the spirits and leader of all the goodness in the world, Barong, and she...
Okay, so she's technically, I guess she's sort of evil incarnate?
Ish, yeah.
I mean, she's the opposite of the king of spirits and stuff, who is supposed to be like...
Which gives me a nice out for what to do if they ever show up, so yay, I now have the knowledge necessary to hopefully avoid this whole mess. And knowing is half the battle, la la.
Yeah. Kind of why I'm glad I stay in a city where there hardly is any supernatural stuff.
That you are aware of, anyway.
True. And plus, if there was, I probably wouldn't go to it, because I'm not stupid. or white. Hey, look at me, or look at my icon, and tell me for a fact that white people don't do that kind of dumb shit. Specifically,
I
white people.
I can't, but it's usually more stupid people than any other demographic of people. What unites them is their stupidity, not their race.
You know, I've seen.
Like
Okay, yeah, well, it
like
tends to be a lot of stupid white people.
book labeled with "Do not read this under any circumstances." What are the first things some fuckers do that are just like hoping to get lucky? They read it. Why not? And then they are surprised when everything goes tits up for them.
Right, and like I don't get that. Why are there's no way there are so many stupid people in the world. Like every time I watch a movie like that, you know?
But then again, we live in the world we live in, and can you honestly tell me there aren't enough stupid people to make this kind of stuff happen?
Fair enough, but they're like college grad students too.
Yeah, but there is no one so stupid as the person who thinks they have all the answers already.
Again, that's actually a fair point. But to be
Yes,
fair, again, I hardly ever see like I've seen like paranormal investigators from like Japan and South America. Those are but those are very rare.
hmm
But it's mostly white people in America that do stupid shit like that and try to taunt fucking ghosts and shit.
yeah. It's like, oh, I'm sure this ancient warning means nothing. Let's read on, even though we know. And then, what? You mean it was all for real? Yes, that's why the label was there. What the fuck are you on? Or do
I'm
not
not
open this box under any circumstances. Well, let's open it. What the fuck are you on?
speaking of like those Japanese ghost hunters. They went to a damn house in the middle of like near the suicide forest,
hmm
like an old abandoned house. It looked like it was debilitating and stuff.
Yeah.
Near the suicide forest. You know, that really creepy place?
Yes. The place that is effectively cursed by all the blood spilled there, more or less,
Yeah.
or allegedly so. I'm I am not. That is one place that I am not brave enough to tread. Like if it was just a regular forest with like your average like leshy or something, those I can reason with. Leshies actually, if you respect their forest, are mostly just cool. But I expect all of that residual pain and all of that residual like just grief would become not to mention I'm a guy with fucking severe anxiety and depressive issues. So if there is any residual effect to that shit, it probably would trigger something in me. And
Right. Also, this is just like to be kind of street here. There's some bad juju in those kind of places, man.
yeah, and unless you are very, very well versed in fucking exorcism, um, even going near such a place is a bad idea.
Right, and that's also why like I try to avoid hiking through forest anymore. Like I used to do when I was a kid, but even then,
Most forests are fine. The most you'll come into contact with in a forest, even if you're incredibly unlucky, would be a leshy. And again, as long as you demonstrate that you respect their forest and you aren't trespassing or aren't willfully trespassing, then not only will they just leave you alone a lot of time they'll actually do you favors in response to you being respectful of the forest. So just if you ever need to go near a forest that you suspect might have a leshy in it, just carry some like apple seeds or something in your pocket and then plant them at the threshold of the forest before you go in. And, let the leshy know you know it's there and that you're not trespassing. And
I
everything
might have
should
to
be
look,
good.
I'm gonna have to look into leshies, aren't I?
They're basically like dryads, but for an entire forest instead of just one tree. They're like forest guardian spirits.
And
From I believe Russian folklore, Russian and East European at least.
they're also in America.
Well, I mean, we have similar things. I mean, that's effectively what the Native Americans thought the Sasquatch was.
I'm also not fucking with Sasquatch. Hell no.
Uh-huh.
It's a big fucking ape, basically.
Yeah. And not only a big fucking ape, but a big fucking ape spirit that you can't touch physically unless it wants you to. So, there's that.
Well,
Anyway.
there are a lot of things I don't fuck with, man. Especially supernatural kind, man.
Uh-huh. And I keep telling you, if you ever do accidentally find yourself in such a situation, you know who, like, you literally know who to call.
Well, first, I'm gonna run my ass out of there.
Well, yeah. But assuming that either you can't because shenanigans or something follows you, you know who to call.
Slasher situation, I'm totally fucked though.
Yeah. Yep. Although honestly, unless we're talking about somebody who's sadistic, I'm not super afraid of those people either, because it's like most slashers kill you quickly and then it's done.
That's actually true. All right. Banana at Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
She eternally pits herself against him, orchestrating her army of evil witches and layaks to spread corruption, death, and destruction across the mythologies of Balinese folklore. However, it is often thought that Rangda may also be closely associated with the Hindu goddess Durga, the fierce, often violent warrior mother that descends upon those that have wronged her with chaos and destruction.
Yeah, and see, this is I'm gonna have to co-sign this because generally what happens when you have a pre-Christian or pagan pantheon with a warrior figure, they end up just straight demonizing it. So and the focus on witch bad also makes me think this is probably a later, probably Christian edition. So I'm betting there is probably some protective or benevolent aspect to her, and they've just forgotten it mostly. Because that tends to be the common case. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
One sec. Yep, Jack-o'-lanterns.
And because of that, Rangda is sometimes worshipped as a protectorate force in certain parts of Bali. Nevertheless, though, she is pretty damn terrifying. Coming in at number 2, Nick Nevin. I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty biased on this one, but much like the Morrigan from our previous part 1, and despite her horrifying depiction, Nick Nevin is pretty damn awesome, if not...
My lady. Because this Nick Naven is one of the old names for the being that we now typically refer to as Mab, a goddess of war, winter, occasionally witchcraft, and considered to be queen of the fairies. In her case, I believe from Scotland, and I believe Nick Naven is even associated with something called the Fíor na Mab, which is the Feast of the Dead in Scottish folklore, which may or may not be one of the places we get the name Mab from. So, on the off chance that this is the being that I willingly consigned a portion of my blood to, my lady.
He also did kind of fuck up that arrangement as well.
Well, I thought I was doing us both a favor. And I don't know what price she's going to extract from me, but I'm still living, so I couldn't have fucked up that bad, or else I would be an ice sculpture right now. Yeah. She's also occasionally referred to as Holda or Perchta in Scandinavian countries, but I have a strong suspicion that it's the same being because you see the same motif in basically every version of them. Goddess of War, Winter, and Death, check. Also referred to as a Queen of the Fairies, check. Occasional rider in and Mistress of the Wild Hunt, check. So yes, when I'm referring to Mab, it is very possible that one of the beings that I am referring to inadvertently is Nick Naven. So On the off chance that she is effectively my boss. Proper respects paid and so forth. Yay.
Mhm.
And now, jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
The very meaning of a nightmare to those that have wronged her, and her many enemies throughout mythology. Derived from the Gaelic surname Nick Navan, meaning daughter of the little saint, Nick Navan is a bloodthirsty queen of the fairies in Scottish folklore. She is principally related to the Irish and Scottish Fela Nemab, the festival of the dead, which is otherwise tied to Samhain, the Celtic New Year, and the darker half of the solstice.
Which is where, or at least one of the places we get the name Mab from.
I
So,
wonder how many like legit gods there are, and not just a bunch of beings that have been given other names. And
the reskin thing.
yeah,
I think it's more than most people think. There are some people who think it's all the same pantheon, just under different names. I don't think so, mostly because there are documented wars between pantheons in various cases, like
yeah,
when the
that all
Romans.
makes sense as well. Like because
Yeah,
a lot of god like king gods, leaders of those pantheons
mhm.
vary drastically.
Yeah,
Like Zeus,
and yeah,
he's a womanizing jackass compared to like maybe someone like Lu of the Tuatha De Danann or Odin.
yeah, very different beings.
I would
Also,
say Horus, but I don't know much about Horus as like a leader of the uh, Egyptian gods. So
Horus is probably about as noble as you're gonna get from a leader deity, basically.
I kind of
But
figured.
but at any rate, even in the Bible, it talks about um, it talks about Yahweh, or basically the Christian and Judaic God, going up against beings like Baal or Chemosh, or the what do you call it? The abomination of Moab. So yeah, there are many gods, but also there are some cases where beings powerful enough, or ancient enough, or fundamental enough will pick up names, because names bind, and so it's useful to have as many names as possible. Plus, the more names you have, the more power you can accrue from those names.
Yeah. So like I don't like as many pantheons as there are, which there are a lot of them now that I've done a lot of research into.
Oh yeah.
But it's so like surprising in a way.
Yep, the world is a more complicated place than most people are aware of.
Yeah.
But how is that different from any other day?
Right. But with what you said, it's just like I don't think like again I'm not denying that there are a lot of gods like legitimately.
Yeah, but some of them like to accrue a lot of names. And to be fair, the idea of Mab and Nicknaven, Hulda and Purgeda all being the same being, that is somewhat my conjecture. Um, but it's only because, like I said, I've done the research, and there's just so many incidental and particular um things they have in common, like being associated with winter, being associated with death, being associated with war, um, being termed as a queen of the fairies.
Right.
Um,
Plus Ireland, Scotland, and I believe Scandinavia are relatively close to one another to the point where like paganism could.
yeah, and then there's a lot of, and again, there's like 3 or 4 different possible origins for the name Mab, and even people um who acknowledge Mab in the modern day fully acknowledge that it's not her original name. It's the name she chose to take because it was the name um, she thought um, most people would know her as. Um, same thing with the Tanya. If you go back enough with her, there's a being called Adne, I believe, is the Celtic goddess of spring that um, Titania is loosely associated with. Same thing with Diana. Same thing with Artemis to some degree. But essentially, what you have is the duality between goddess of war, winter, and death, and the goddess of spring, fertility, and summer. So, that whole, like, that duality there. And it does follow with the Seelie versus Unseelie court and the two, yearly troops of Fae, one around midsummer, one around midwinter. So,
Mhm.
it
Uh,
a
shall we?
little it's a little bit conjecture based because unfortunately most people just didn't write shit down. But
An
it's
educated guess, basically.
yeah, it's a heavily educated guess and one that seemed plausible given human behavior. So yeah. Anyway,
Jack-o'-lanterns?
jack-o'-lanterns.
The fact of the matter is, Nick Nevin is a name often tied up to depict the seminal mother witch, and in Samhain, her name was given amongst other powerful female deities, Satya, Ben-Soja, Zovania, Abundia, and Hero-Diana, and is thus tied in with the various practitioners of necromancy and sorcery in Celtic mythology.
Yeah. And again, my lady.
Jack-o'-lanterns?
Yeah, jack-o'-lanterns.
As the renowned poet and author Sir Walter Scott described, Nick Nevin rode on the storm and marshalled a rambling host of wanderers beneath her grim banner. She was a hag that rode at the head of witches, sorceresses, and elves indifferently, always emerging upon the ghostly eve of All Hallows Mass. Now, as I said at the opening of this video, modern religion gave the old ways an incredibly bad image, and because of that, Nick Nevin was said to be ferociously angered by newfound enemies. But as
Well, not to be rude here or anything, but you are kind of intruding on her, like, ancestral people here. So, like, were you expecting all the existing deities to just roll over for you?
To draw a weird comparison, and honestly, something I really would have loved to seen besides Mad Sweeney, which is the Celtic pantheon.
Mm-hmm.
There's like their depiction of like Mav, and Titania, like the Fae.
It would have been interesting. I don't think Neil Gaiman included them in the American Gods book, but the
But what I was
series and the book kind of deviate from each other a lot. So
they
could have easily.
Right, but what I was gonna say was like it was kind of like the new gods and the old gods conflict in American Gods with like Christianity trying to push out sort of the old ways and stuff. Like obviously, like the quote unquote old gods at the time, which would have been the Fae, would not take kindly to that.
Yeah, and even classifying them as Fae is arguably a little bit odd because there's some debate as to whether they were actually minor goddesses and they just sort of chose to be Fae in order to maintain a semblance of power. I honestly, I'm gonna plead ignorance on that because I certainly don't want to say something that then gets told to me is false. And given that I'm kind of on her payroll by my own hook and crook now, I don't want to make waves because I might end up frozen beneath a glacier or something. Who knows?
Shall we?
Yep. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
As the legendary Scottish folklorist Alexander Montgomery said, the elder Nick Nevin regularly feasted upon the flesh of holy men. And finally, coming in at number one spot, Punchta, which is a figure that potentially ties neatly into our previous entry, Nick Nevin, and perhaps could even be tied into the same deity that was secretly worshipped across ancient Europe, a mysterious horned god often related to the goddess Diana, the natural deity of the moon, the hunt.
Okay, this I'm gonna have to maybe put an asterisk beside because as far as my understanding goes, Diana is a being more heavily associated with summer and with like the harvest rather than winter and death and all the other things. So if I had to guess, if the name Diana is in any way transferable at all, it's probably more transferable to Titania, especially considering that the first time the name Titania was used was in Ovid's Metamorphosis as a secondary name for Diana. So my guess is that both Nick and Evan or Mab and Diana stroke Titania are associated with the moon, but that doesn't make them the same deity. It sort of makes them tied to the same forces, but that's why they're considered quote unquote sisters or sister deities. It's because one of them is the summer and the rejuvenation and the life, and the other is the winter and the preservation and the death. And I am not allowed to take sides in either case because they will both me up if I do. So just that asterisk where it needs to go. I'm 90% sure that Diana associates to Titania, not Mab, but that's a different story for a different day. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Mm-hmm.
Europe, a mysterious horned god often related to the goddess Diana, the natural deity of the moon, the hunt, and the wild. If you've never heard of the witch cult hypothesis, I definitely recommend reading up on it because it's incredibly interesting. But that's by the by, because what we're concerned with is one of its most terrifying depictions, perched at the arbiter of cultural taboos in Alpine paganism.
And again, I find it highly likely that Purged is probably another name for the being that I know closely as Mab. But she can call herself whatever she likes to call herself. It is not my job to try and tell her anything. I'm just waiting for that favor that I owe her to get called up. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
In many instances, Perchta was given two forms, that of a beautiful young woman, white as snow, or as an elderly, haggard old crone who tempted children with bright red, poisonous apples. Sound familiar? Perchta would roam the countryside and slip into homes during the dead of night, where she would find out if children and young servants of the household had been working hard all year, and if they had.
And here's another reason why I think there's some association between her and Mab, because another possible origin for the name Mab is from the Old English Mab, which translates to crone or witch. So Queen Mab means crone queen or witch queen. It's possible that all of these might be the reason that she took the name Mab, or that she's using the name Mab, because they all sort of allude to her and bind to her in some way. But yes, there's like 3 different separate possible origins for the name Mab, and one of them involves a crone. So yeah, possibly again, my lady. Jack-o'-lanterns.
They'd find a small silver coin by their bedside or in their shoe the next day. If they hadn't, though, she would slit open their bellies, remove their stomachs and guts, and stuff the hole with straw and pebbles. Yeah, it is often thought, though, that Perchta permeated her way across the traditions of.
So, I want to wait. 2 questions.
Okay.
From the information I was given there, right?
Mm-hmm.
1, is that where technically the tooth fairy, like a loose?
Well, it's a similar tradition of that, similar, and again similar to like the Santa Claus thing. My main issue is, they usually have a problem with silver. So if this was Mab all along, which I'm tempted to start singing a version of Agatha All Along, but I'm pretty sure I would die of hypothermia before I finished it. But if this was Mab all along, how the fuck did she get away with touching silver? Because silver and iron both tend to be fey no-nos there.
What about wearing gloves, right?
Now there is that, I suppose, but even just it being in the presence of the room they're in can sometimes bugger them up. So who knows?
Yeah, then also like if they were like the all year round thing, like guess good and stuff.
That's the other thing. I'm betting this was one of those traditions that parents sort of made up a little bit because I've studied a bunch about Mab and about her associated personas, and again, assuming that my theory is somewhat accurate and that Perchta and Mab are the same being, she doesn't care if you're good or not. She is cold as ice, as the old saying goes. So
Fair enough. But I was also
although I guess it might be linked with her conception of law because she does care an infinite amount of fucks about that.
oh,
Morality she doesn't care about at all, but law she definitely does. That's one of the reasons why I stupidly bound myself to her, because I assumed that conception of fuck morality but law and order make perfect sense could be something we had in common, and therefore was a reason why I wanted to work with her.
right.
That and the fact that a friend of mine who worked with her told me that she was very similar to her portrayal in Dresden Files, and I really, really loved her portrayal in Dresden Files. So there's that.
Right. So yeah, respect for the law. Totally get that.
Mhm.
Granted, I kind of abide on my own code of sorts,
Uh-huh.
where the law of man somewhat fails. But
I don't think you'd get much argument from her there, because from what I've heard of people that I've met that have allegedly worked with Faye, they are so confused by mortal law. It's not even funny. Like, why? What?
yeah, like hey, join the club, man. It's
Yeah, we haven't even figured it out ourselves, my lady. You're not alone there.
Granted, I wouldn't be stupid enough to try and bind myself to her simply on that matter.
Yes, fair enough. But to be fair, it wasn't the idea of binding myself to her that was the problem. It was I didn't foresee her taking it as a personal slight and then using it to extract a favor from me at some nebulous point in the future. But I should have, because if it were me, I might pretend to be upset about something that didn't even upset me and then use it as an excuse to have a favor from you in my pocket at an even point in the future when I need it. And if I can think of something devious like that to do, then the freaking Queen of the Unseelie Fae certainly can think of that. So I'm not even sure if she actually was pissed off by it or if she's using it as a loophole in order to have me in her back pocket for when she needs me later. But in either case, I'm sort of okay with it. My only problem with her was when I tried to pay off the debt and she considered my attempt to pay the debt as more debt. That was the only time where I was genuinely annoyed with her for like 5 seconds.
Yeah, you try to speed it up.
I just was thinking, okay, I know she likes pain and I know she likes cold, so I'll just stick my hand in a cup full of ice, because this was in the middle of summer, so it wasn't like I could go walking in the snow or something. But I'll just stick my hand in a bucket full of ice until it goes numb and starts to hurt, and the pain will be part of the payment. But apparently, according to the friends that I have that have directly worked with her, who were nice enough to evoke her for me and ask, that also probably was considered addition to the debt.
Yeah, like, yeah, try to speed it up. That's on you, you absolute dumbass. In that moment.
And maybe the reason I'm still fucking alive is that I wasn't trying to do it to cheat her or anything. I was just trying to do the honest, forthright thing and pay the debt I owe. Because
I mean, you could have, in a better stance, you could have just like gradually just hurt yourself every day, like hold a few ice cubes in your hand until they melted. Like,
yeah, but I'm fairly certain that wouldn't have counted because it's too minor. I mean, we're talking about the literal force of winter here, so.
But still, man.
I was trying to do the most I could with what I had with the rationale.
Right, but you tried to speed it up.
Which again leads me to the idea of maybe she has some scheme in mind, and that would explain why I'm not dead yet.
Yeah.
And
Still,
if she has some scheme in mind and she needs me to do something, I'm fine with that, especially because the terms I made in the bargain that I struck was that neither of us would do anything to try and change the other. So as long as whatever she requires from me is something that, is within my nature to do, then I am more than happy to, oblige her. Even if she decides to take for freaking ever. Although to be fair to her, she's an immortal force of nature, and I'm a human being. So God only knows how long a long time actually would be to her. It might have been the relative equivalent of 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Still, you fucked up to her. You fucked up. Own it.
I mean, I did, but as far as fuck-ups go, especially with this particular being, it could be a lot worse.
Still, you gotta own it.
I do own it, but at the same time, if she was really if she was really pissed off, I'd be dead. So she's clearly not pissed off enough to go full, I'm setting the wild hunt loose on you or something. Because a couple years ago, when a bunch of newbie witches decided to hex the moon for some godforsaken reason and ended up killing a bunch of little folk, she fucking gave them cancer. So
that was last year.
Yeah, but in any case, if that's the modern standard for what she does when she's pissed off, then I'm betting that either it wasn't something she considered that harsh, or she considered the fact that I was trying to do it out of respect for her, not out of, scheming malice, or the most likely option, in my opinion, she wants me to do something for her later, and so she's keeping me around so that I can do whatever it is I'm meant to do for her.
Right.
And in any case, I don't blame her for that. So, yeah.
Howie, I also did want to bring up that I was also reminded of Krampus a bit, or like the punishment.
Yeah. I did a whole segment of video on Krampus, so most people are able to figure out what my thoughts on that whole thing are. By the by, go to my channel, watch the Christmas special thereon, and you will get my 2 cents on the Krampus movie and its associated lore. Because Michael Dougherty, God bless him, is the king of respect the lore, goddammit, which is probably my favorite moral of all time. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Of Old High German, taking many various forms and appearances. She was also thought to be the female mantle of Berchtold, a figure that was often tied to the mythical Wild Hunt, a band of mysterious demonic riders that have plagued the folklore of Europe and the British Isles for thousands of years, roaming the wild places of the world, doomed for eternity to hunt supernatural beasts and the dead.
And again, this is one of the reasons why I associate them, because Mab is also considered to be an occasional leader of the Wild Hunt.
The demonic part,
that's probably Christian newbieism. The initial the initial association was just either the dead or the spirits, or
Yeah.
both. Which the Wild Hunt is at least an interesting phenomenon. The idea that like elves and humans, ghosts can just kind of ride together for whenever, and they can be called by anyone sufficiently powerful enough to do so. Usually Odin, but sometimes also the King of the Goblins or the Earl King, and sometimes, especially in the case of a couple years ago, when a bunch of witch talkers went and pissed the queens off.
See, it's one of
The
those.
queens can borrow it.
It's one of those reasons I'm not on TikTok.
Yeah, I'm never getting a TikTok account specifically because I don't even want to get anywhere near associated with that community, because she's still pissed off about it. They
Although,
both are still pissed off about it, and they should be.
although there are good TikTokers on there.
Fortunately, though, a lot of the good or interesting TikToks get uploaded to YouTube, so I don't even have to get TikTok in order to watch them.
I go on there sometimes. I don't have an account or anything. I just watch them on the site.
Mm.
All right, anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Come on, guys. Isn't mythology just great? Well, there we have it, horror fans. Our part 2 list for the top 5 scariest mythological gods in history. What do you got?
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. So that was 138. I don't really add. Dalton.
Nope. Just another general, happy Halloween, kids, kind of thing.
So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avideze, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Don't fuck with ancient deities of winter, war, and death. And if you do, fuck off.